Hello, everybody.
Hey there, Stan. How are you?
Good. Do we have a list of speakers?
Yeah, I just emailed it to you,
Okay, great.
and I
Thank
will.
you.
I'll highlight the names of people as we go through, as folks speak.
And it'll show up because it's a Google Doc, right?
Yep.
I'm on WebEx, not Google Doc.
No, the client list is on.
I see.
We got 56 people.
28. Oh, 56 signed up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did the department produce anything?
Yeah, we posted now, right? We got it rendering.
Yeah, we just got it. I am sending it to the full board. We're working, and just so you both know, we're live.
Right.
We're working with Duet to post ASAP.
Yeah.
We're just on, right? Nobody can hear us, or people can hear us? You're muted.
You are live. People can hear you and see you, or we can't see you actually.
Oh,
Everyone can see me.
I got this new computer and the camera is you got to pull the camera up, so I I have it down all the time.
Hey, there you are.
Felipe.
Hey, Stanley. You know, I hope next time we spend an evening together is doing something else together.
Right.
Maybe
You know,
we have to plan for a board.
I know. I spoke to someone.
But if more than four of us get together, even for talking, do we have to make it public?
That's a great question.
We need legal counsel, Bobby.
I guess if we're just eating and not talking business, I don't know.
It's a good question. We'll look into it.
I think that if you had a quorum, even if it was at the local dive bar, you would still have to invite the public.
Wow.
But if I invite them at home in Harlem, we need to invite everyone else?
Got to provide access.
I've done it.
Do it on WebEx.
I've done it. I've invited a quorum of the board to my house, and they were all there along with 80 other people, and it was legit. Social occasions do not require public announcement of a board meeting.
Oh, because it's not a board meeting.
It's a good party. The party was canceled this year for maybe next year.
Yeah, maybe next year. Looking forward to it.
Yeah.
We begin. I had a question that I never.
I got my
never
second
thought
shot
about
today.
Yeah, so congratulations.
Oh, me last week. Good. Meg and Bobby and others. Have we ever had an opportunity for people inside the island to testify at our hearings? Is there a way to do that?
Actually, we have someone on the list tonight who will call in. So Stanley, just a heads up, we'll ping you when he's able to call, so we can hear from him.
You got it.
Great.
But is there like a process where whenever we have a hearing, like at least one or two people are selected to speak to us?
No, I think Bennett. If people want to. I mean, this is one of the good things about doing this through this medium is people have an opportunity to call in a way that you couldn't in our regular board meetings when we're sitting, when we're all in a room together. So.
Yeah, we did set up a voicemail box where folks can call and leave a voicemail. So we've received a couple of those, and that'll be a part of the public comment. But it's hard to facilitate the folks calling in, and we haven't found a great way to do it. But hopefully it'll work this evening.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Hi, Steve.
Yeah.
Hey, Steve.
What happened? Oh,
We won.
sounds good. All right.
We was talking about we have somebody from an incarcerated person calling in tonight.
And I was talking about the logistics of getting together when we can get together safely without having to invite all the advocates and make it public.
It kept asking me if I wanted to talk, and every time I hit that button, it exploded.
Yeah.
So we have renderings. That's what I saw come up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we just got something. So Bennett is working on posting it, and I just sent it to all of you. So we'll get it to the public
Okay.
as soon as possible.
Does it look like a checkerboard?
Stanley,
Can you read it? Can you actually see it?
yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
it's
good.
architect rendering.
Terrific.
Stanley, Marco is going to join shortly, but I think, and Jackie was going to try and may join, but I think we probably can get started.
Okay, sounds good. Good evening, everybody. This is a special public hearing of the New York City Board of Correction is now in session. Today, the board has convened this hearing to receive public comment on the proposed restrictive housing rule. This is our second and final public hearing on this rule. The hearing is required under the City Administrative Procedure Act. Though required, the board also views this hearing as critically important to the rulemaking process. As we saw in 2019, the public's input led to critical changes that have brought us here today. There are several key provisions in this proposed rule. One, it ends solitary confinement in all current forms of restrictive housing by November 1st, 2021. and replaces it with Risk Management and Accountability System, RMAS. RMAS is a 3-level progression model with one, a minimum of 10 hours out of cell socializing with at least one other person, individualized behavior support plans, steady experienced case managers, periodic reviews by the multidisciplinary team, 5 hours of daily programming, and daily rounding by health and mental health staff. This rule also ends the use of routine restraint desks for all by November 1st. It requires the department to use cells for de-escalation confinement after incidents rather than intake areas. It limits the scope of lockdowns to only housing areas that must be locked down instead of the entire facility. And it requires regular and public reporting by the department. This proposed rule aims to change the way the department responds to violence. It prioritizes safety and support for all and creates an environment whereby behavior change is both possible and rewarded. Through the public comment period thus far, the board has received several requests for photos, drawings, and tours of the RMAS units. The board agrees that it is critically important for the public to have insight into the layout of these units. The department has determined that it would be inappropriate to release photos of the unit for security reasons. Conducting tours of the units would also present challenges for staff and people in custody, given the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. However, late this afternoon, we received renderings of the level 1 units. We are working with DoIT to post on the board's website as soon as possible. We have also worked with the department to ensure that people in custody have the opportunity to review the rule and comment. The department has distributed a copy of the proposed rule packet to each housing area in the jail system. And there is also a copy of the proposed rule in each law library for anyone who requests it. DOC and CHS included information on how to access and review the rule in the weekly COVID newsletter. DOC has also issued a teletype to encourage staff to review and comment. The board has set up a dedicated voicemail box where anyone, including staff and people in custody, can call to leave comment on the rule. Please call 212-669-7900. The number again is 212-669-7900. When you call that number, press option 2 to leave a comment about the rule. We strongly encourage all to provide their feedback on this rule prior to the public comment period closing on April 16, 2021. We will now hear public.
Stanley, I have a question. Given that we have not yet posted the pictures, and today is the 6th, is the 14th, shouldn't that period be extended for commenting?
That is something we can consider, Bobby. Yes.
Well, how do you consider it?
I think that's something we need to discuss. We do want to move it forward, and we want to hear comment. We're hoping we can get the renderings up ASAP, and we may need to extend it to hear a further comment. But we'll make that decision when we close out this meeting, and we'll inform the public, as we always do, about whether we extended it and whether we're going to hold another meeting or we'll accept written comments.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we will now hear public comment on the proposed restrictive housing rule. I have a list of speakers who signed up to speak. I'm going to call each person's name. When you hear your name, please raise your hand using the hand icon below the participants list on your WebEx screen. If you don't see the participants list, click on the silhouette of a person on the menu at the bottom of your screen. Once you open the participants list, you should see the hand icon in order to raise your hand. When you raise your hand, we will unmute you and you will be able to turn on your video. You can then begin your public comment. You will have 4 minutes to speak today. I will tell you when it has been 4 minutes, and we will move on to the next speaker. We're asking everybody, we have a lot of people signed up, and I understand we even have somebody who is currently incarcerated that wants to speak, and once we get connected to that person, we'll have them come in, but we're really asking everybody to stick to 4 minutes. So we will cut your mic if you go beyond the 4 minutes, because everybody wants to share. We're also accepting written comments. You can email your written comments to boc@boc.nyc.gov. Again, boc@boc.nyc.gov, or mail it to 1 Center Street, room 2213, New York, New York, 10007. Public comment on the proposed rule closes on Friday, April 16th, 2021. As Bobby requested, we may extend that. We want to get the rendering out there to folks and have them give them an opportunity to comment. Please be sure to submit your written comment before the end of the 16th as it stands right now. I will now call our first speaker. Our first speaker, let me just come back. Our first speaker is Council Member Antonio Reynoso. Good evening, Council Member.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you, Mr. Richards. Appreciate it. Good evening to the members of the board. My name is Antonio Reynoso, and I am the council member of the 34th District. I can do video. Awesome. I apologize. I want to begin by thanking the advocates who showed up to testify today and yesterday and have been working to ban solitary confinement tirelessly for years. Your persistence and tenacity is giving us, all of us, the strength and energy to see this fight to the end. My message to the board today is that these rules fall far short of banning solitary confinement in the city of New York and should be scrapped. Our ask has been clear and unwavering throughout this process. Solitary confinement is torture and must be banned outright immediately. The rules being considered today not only fail to ban this barbaric practice, but perpetuate the extreme forms of isolation that we know have severe impacts on those forced to suffer through it. In the past, I have implored this board to ask yourselves if you would be comfortable with one of your family members being subjected to such an inhumane treatment. We know that many folks we hold in detention suffer from mental illness and that extreme isolation can have deeply harmful impacts on these illnesses. We have witnessed tragic consequences from the use of solitary confinement, including the heartbreaking suicide of Khalif Browder. All people in city jails should have access to at least 14 hours out of cell per day, with at least 7 hours of congregate programming and activities with other people in spaces conducive for people to engage in programs and activities with other people. These are not privileges, but rather a baseline level of treatment we should follow for human beings. Furthermore, people should have access to lawyers to help ensure any adopted rules are properly implemented and that those in detention are protected from harmful practices. This past year has exposed the numerous injustices present within our society, and people have risen up and spoken out to demand bold and transformational change. Members of the board, you have an opportunity here to make history and deliver on those demands. Let's make New York City a leader on these issues and a beacon of hope when it comes to our criminal justice reform. People's lives depend on the decisions you make here, and I urge you to do the right thing and ban the horrendous practice of solitary confinement from our city forever. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak today.
Thank you, Council Member.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Our next speaker is First Deputy Public Advocate Nick Smith.
Good evening. Can I be heard and or seen?
You are heard but not seen. Yes, now we can see you.
Okay, great. Hey, Stanley, how you doing? Good to see you. Good to see you all.
Hey, good to see you, Nick.
Yeah. I am Nick Smith, again, First Deputy Public Advocate. Thank you for the opportunity. On behalf of Public Advocate Williams, in 2019, our office was proud to join survivors, advocates, and other electeds in opposing the proposed BOC rules at that time. Thankfully, those rules did not pass. In June of last year, the mayor made an overdue but welcome commitment to ending solitary confinement in New York City. And it is true that solitary confinement is torture. I'm probably disappointed that the rules in front of the board today seem to betray this commitment and fail to provide justice for Layleen Polanco, Khalif Browder, and other countless victims of solitary confinement. These rules must be significantly revised in order to be considered legitimate end to solitary. And there's three key points here. First, the conditions of those assigned to RMAS must be dramatically improved. As proposed, level 1 would be cramped and dark cages in the North Infirmary Command, which is notorious for brutal conditions. So-called out of cell time would be in a cage shared with only one other person, lack any real programming, recreation, or normal interactions, and be limited to only 10 hours a day, 4 lower than the BOC's minimum standards. The conditions in level 2 and 3 units are only marginally better. This contradicts those reforms' aims of reducing negative physical and mental impacts and affirming basic human rights. Changes there must be made. Next, there needs to be strict caps on the amount of time one is allowed to spend in RMAS. As written, the rules would allow for a person to be held in RMAS indefinitely. Changes should be made to guarantee that folks will move through RMAS at the presumed benchmarks in the rules, 30, 45, or 60 days in level 1, 15 days in level 2, 15 in level 3. And if the previously referenced needed improvements to conditions are not made, the cap on RMAS 1 should be reduced to 15 days. Third, and finally, it should be ensured that members of vulnerable groups and those who are not guilty in violations are not placed in RMAS. A robust due process system that includes the right to legal representation during discipline hearings that could result in RMAS assignment must be implemented. The board should mimic provisions in the Massachusetts Code of Regulations that establish this right to those in custody. Additionally, the categories of people exempted from RMAS must be expanded. I will close by saying that too much is at stake to have reforms that are ending solitary in name only. Ending solitary means more than rearranging the deck chairs. It means protecting the health and safety of those who are incarcerated, giving real opportunities to those who violate protocols to grow and improve, and abolishing punishment for punishment's sake. Our office looks forward to reviewing a revised version of these rules, and we thank you for the opportunity. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Nick. Our next speaker is Julia Davis.
Can you hear me?
Can hear you now. Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity today. My name is Julia Davis. I'm the Director of Youth Justice and Child Welfare at the Children's Defense Fund New York. I've testified before the board since 2014, and I was formerly a member of the department's Young Adult Advisory Board, which, as many of you know, is no longer active. My written comment is forthcoming, but I want to focus on my concern around the young adults, a concern that I know many of the public share, and is a community on the island that I know many members of the board are concerned about. The reforms that were adopted in 2015 were intended to protect young adults, and that was based on well-developed science and research around emerging adulthood. The reality is that the proposed rules expose young adults to extremely restrictive settings and, frankly, cages. We don't see pictures of them yet, but in all descriptions, that's what we're talking about. They can be held in these settings for unlimited periods of time. And frankly, these rules do not ensure that young people will get the programming that they need. Essentially, they can be provided either in these cages or in cells. And as you heard in yesterday's testimony before the board from correction officers themselves, young people on the island are not getting mandated services and programs because of COVID, and that's contributing to violence. So we're setting young people up to fail with these rules. I think it's important to note, as many of you know, that we don't permit this type of restrictive housing, cage-based programming and education, cell-based services, or restraint desks for youth who are 17, just over in Crossroads or Horizon. So why would this be the right approach for 18-year-olds? You may also know that young people 18 to 21, the same age as those who are on Rikers Island, who are convicted in the adult court, who are placed in secure facilities upstate, are also not permitted to face any of the conditions that RMAS and these rules propose. So it's simply boggling that the board is pursuing this for young adults. I will say this, I would urge the board to encourage the department to bring together the Young Adult Advisory Board. I think these rules could have really benefited from that community of providers, defenders, people working in the building, unified and uniform and otherwise, who are working on what will bring down violence and meet the needs of young adults. Because that community is no longer meeting, I feel that the board and frankly, the department is missing a key input for resolving the issues on Rikers for the young adults. But frankly, these proposed rules don't do that. So with that, I will leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Julia.
Our next speaker is 5. Is 5 on? All right.
He can't hear.
5.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. How are you? Dr. Cohen, as always, good to see you. Esteemed board member. Right. Felipe, good to see you, comrades. One, I'm going to say a comment, and then I would like one of my youth leaders to speak. He's going to take up the rest of the time. He did sign up to, so if he's on the list, DeAndre Simmons, I wanted to add to that. Ending this torture, we have to do it. I mean, we have an opportunity right now to address a lot of the social issues that happen to people before they come to jail and after they come to jail. People with extreme mental illness and people with mental illness itself. This facility does not, this new rules is just solitary by another name, you know? This is really what it is. We don't have access to programming. There is no legal defense when additional charges are going to be imposed. And can you imagine a person with schizophrenia being trapped in under these conditions that makes them react? And so with that, I just want you to hear some voices and also, hear from the youth who also are confined to these conditions, because we're not asking for any additional programming for youth. I think that this is just another facility way of readdressing and renaming solitary confinement and perpetual punishment. We need to address issues and not always lock those issues away in units. Thank you.
All right, so yeah, my name is DeAndre Simmons. I'm from the youth anti-prison program, and I just want to talk on like basically the situation. I feel like 17-year-olds and 18-year-olds shouldn't be able to go to solitary confinement, because it's like, it's weird. It's like it plays with your mind. You think all day, you can't focus. Like, I need to interact with people. I can't be trapped by myself. My first time actually going to the island, I was on a bus, and I didn't know, like I was scared. I didn't really know what was gonna happen really. But it was another kid in the cage in front of me, and I'm looking at him like, why is he in mittens? Why is he in cuffs like that? Like he look at me, but he's looking at 161 like he never seen outside in years. Like he's like, yo, look at that, yo, what's this? And I'm baffled, because I'm like, what's wrong with, like, you never seen outside before? Like, I don't know. It was just confusing to me. Like, he was in what they put him in solitary confinement because he kicked a door. He said he was only trying to get one of the guards like attention because he needed something. He wanted help from something. And they put him in there for kicking the door. He had mittens on and cuffs and all that. And I was just like, that was weird to me. Like, but for me, when I went to the island and I was away from the 21-year-olds and I was with all the 18-year-olds and they had us in two different little, I felt safer. It wasn't, like, it was like, I don't know, like, yeah. It's like too much. It's too much. It's too much. I don't know how to go about it, really.
Well, when we confine youth, and he helps youth when they come home as an anti-violence interrupter, but also as a youth mentor, we see the damage and the perpetual punishment that this causes on a daily basis. Right now, we're doing youth housing. It is impossible to do that without mental health counseling. And so creating these restrictive housing, I'm afraid that we're just reinventing the wheel again. Like Rikers was first constructed in 1650. This is America's first jail. Our first intentions was to punish people. We have an opportunity in New York State to lead the world in human rights by denying this new unit to be built. And also listen to the recommendations of people who have been working in this field for decades. The out-of-cell program time, the refusal to be able to participate in programming, I'm scared of. I did time upstate with a rule book that was like tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and each one could be any one. That's leaving it up to the officer to give you in the cell programming, which we know does not work for teenagers. And I mean teenagers who are from the age up until 21 until actual adult brain development. And so I want to thank you for your time, but I also want you to make a decision as if it was you or your family members or your children or your son being confined there. Because that's the situation I'm facing. That's the situation the world is facing. And we look at our children returning home so damaged when we have the opportunity to help them return better and humane conditions. And I thank you for your time and listening to the young people as they speak from experience.
Thank you. Thank you, Dante.
No.
Our next speaker is Melina Brown.
That's Melania.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Hello, my name is Melina Brown, an activist and sister of Lejo Polanco. My baby sister died alone on June 7th, 2019, in solitary confinement while being held at the notorious Rikers Island, while few correctional officers stood a few steps away from her laughing while she took her last breath, instead of helping her. If these correctional officers would have done their jobs and helped her instead of laughing, my sister's chances of being here with me today would have been greater. They were not even following protocol and checking in on her every 15 minutes like they were supposed to, even after medical objections and medical staff's advice not to place her back in solitary confinement. So excuse me if I do not have much faith in your CEOs, Benny Bosquio. She died under your watch, as many have. Miss Antoine, when I hear you speak so aggressively about keeping solitary as a tool, I cannot help but to wonder how many humans suffered by you and were thrown in solitary confinement. Yesterday you said something that didn't sit right with me. They are here to pay for their crimes. Does that mean it's okay to treat them, for them to be treated less than humans because of their mistakes? We are all humans, ma'am. I am sure you're not perfect and have made many mistakes in life. I mean, look at how the cops are killing us out here and getting away with their crimes. So please be incredibly careful when you see things like they are in here to pay for crimes, because no one in uniform pays for this. Also, let's keep in mind, not everyone behind those walls are detainees. And even if they were, they do not deserve to be treated less than human. I do not even wish solitary confinement on those officers that watched my sister die and laughed instead of helping her. These are humans, these are humans. Even if you guys do not think too highly of them, they have loved ones that do. They do not need torture. What they need is rehabilitation and more programs. How can our world be a safer place when you guys are creating monsters behind those walls and then releasing them to our community? They are already being tortured by being away from their families. They do not need extra torture. They do not need a cage within a cage for your own reasons. My baby sister was a prime example that you guys use solitary and restricted house units, which are both the same thing, for your own personal reasons, not even for behavior issues. Access to counsel is needed, not only as a discipline hearing, but also throughout the placement review process. Refusal to participate in programming should not keep people from moving from level 2 to level 3 or from level 3 to general population. And I still stand with the fact that a slighter larger cage wasn't going to save my baby sister. I need you guys to keep in mind that my sister passed away. My sister. Okay, not your sister, not your brother, not your mother, not your aunt, but mine. I wear her around my neck in ashes. So when you make these decisions, okay, and when we all praise these correctional officers that are in there abusing inmates, keep my sister in mind. My sister did not only suffer from epilepsy, she also suffered from schizophrenia, which I'm sure she was going crazy in there because she goes crazy locked in my mom's house all day. So please keep all this in mind when you guys make your decisions and when you guys speak so highly of these correctional officers. Right now, there's a correctional officer in Essex County that tells a lieutenant, actually, that tells his new correctional officers, oh, you know how we keep them in place? When one acts up, you take everything away from everybody. Like that, they get on him, and they know not to step out of line next time. These are the people that you guys have training these babies, these new COs that come in the jail system. I call them babies because there's no hate or nothing in their heart. They're trained by these other old heads that lieutenants and other correctional officers are in there that are no good. They're trained to do wrong. They're trained to hurt. They're trained to harm. These correctional officers that did that to my sister, I don't even wish for them to be in there. It's inhumane. End this practice. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Melania. Our next speaker is Nina Torres.
Hi, do you hear me?
Yes.
I don't know if you're able to see me, but my name is Nina Torres. I currently have my son who did 30 days in solitary confinement. He has bipolar, amongst other mental health issues. He actually had suicidal ideations due to a deranged lunatic who actually attacked him. And me, prior to that, I actually was filing complaints due to the overcrowding in the jail systems. You know, solitary confinement only makes he's not even being treated for his mental illness, which makes the situation even worse. And he should not have been there for 30 days punished because someone else attacked him. And you know what they told him? Well, he should have stood there and took the beating. What about my son would have died taking a beating? You know, this is just inhumane what's happening. And instead of my son being rehabilitated and being somewhere where he's going to get the proper treatment, that was never even done. You know, and the fact that my son could have committed suicide, which he has multiple times in Rikers, and now he's on the boat. And it seems like no one cares. There's so much injustice in this criminal system, and no one seems to care. These kids are they're not being rehabilitated. They're not given the proper treatment, not even to be able to deal with society when they're actually released from prison. That's why they always return back. You know, and solitary confinement should actually, they should remove it. Give programs to them. Give them mental health counseling. That is what's needed. And that's not what's being given to these inmates. And I know for one, because my son is not even he's not even properly being treated inside there. So every day is always a problem. And my worst thing is to get a phone call to say that my son is dead or he committed suicide or something, because you guys are not doing anything to assist him. And that's horrible. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Omar Moore.
He's not yet in the room.
Okay. We'll go to Alexandra Smith.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Are you able to see me as well? Or
No.
okay, I'm just gonna turn on my videos if I can real quick, and if not, I guess I'll go with it. Are you able to turn on my video by chance? Oh, I've got it. Never mind. Sorry, I'm just having a technical issue here for a second. Sorry. Okay, thanks for bearing with me. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay.
You may begin.
Thank you. My name's Alexandra Smith on behalf of the Prisoners' Rights Project at the Legal Aid Society. Over the past few months, we've spoken directly with people in DOC custody who are housed in the very same units that are the model for the units proposed by this rule. I'm sharing the words and lived experiences that people disclose to me. These units are cruel and detrimental to a person's dignity and well-being. Here are some examples. A person housed at NIC in the 6th cell told me that the only time he was allowed outside of his cell was for 1 hour in an outdoor kennel. There's barely enough space to work out. I feel like I'm being treated like a dog, he told me. He spoke about there being mold in the bathroom and that the only so-called programming available are video games, 1 to 2 times a week, and TV. Previously, he was at West Facility in de facto isolation, or as he aptly called it, an underground Bing, for 17 months. I went crazy being housed there, he told me. A young person housed at the secure unit at GRVC said that he had not been permitted to leave his cell for over a week. He had not had access to showers, and the message he asked us to give you today, don't ignore us. A 21-year-old housed at the secure unit at GRVC told me that he's hungry and that he isn't receiving enough food. He longs to breathe fresh air. He has not been outside in months. A 23-year-old locked up in punitive segregation at GRVC told me, I'm isolated in here. I can't breathe in these cells. It's scaring me. I need to be able to walk around for my mental health, but I can't. I'm going crazy in here. We can't do nothing. We're just sitting here all day in these cells. I could die in here. The only access to rec is 1 hour in another cage. We're rotting in our cells. A 24-year-old housed in punitive segregation at GRVC. My thoughts are racing a million miles an hour. Being housed at Rikers has been the worst thing that's ever happened to me in my life. I want to move around and see what that feels like. A 24-year-old housed in ESH level 2 reported that he has been in level 2 since last February. He's struggling to move to the next level when he's outside his cell, he's placed in shackles and mittens. When ESH was moved to GRVC, that's when everything changed, she told me. They just made it a more dangerous environment. Lots of stabbings, assaults. I've been forced to adapt to this. They try to provoke people to be violent. I'm in a jungle. Lions can pop out, bears can come out. I'm traumatized. He reports that there was not any out of cell time for the first few weeks after ESH was moved to GRVC. The whole ESH program is a joke, another young person reported, who's currently housed there. He has yet to receive any paperwork from his ESH placement hearing, and he doesn't know what he needs to do to level up. He explained that when he is out of his cell, he's in shackles. He estimates that for over 3 weeks, he has only been released from his cell 6 times, but never for the 7 hours as required. A 19-year-old in Secure reported he was left in the shower for 8 hours alone with wet clothes and he was freezing. He told me that he's afraid. It's like a war zone in here. I've seen so much, I can't get it out of my head. I can't sleep at night. I'm going crazy in the cell. Please pray for me, please. I ask you, please listen to this testimony. Do not replicate these inhumane conditions under a different name. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next, yeah, thank you. Our next speaker is Joey Jackson.
Stan, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Sorry.
Could you call
Go ahead,
Omari
Ben.
Moore again? He's calling in from the island, and we'll only have so many minutes.
Got it. Omari?
Yeah, hello?
Yes, we can hear you, Omari.
Oh, wow. Okay. Hello, all right. My name is Omar Lejo Moore. My number is 349-200-0002. I've been incarcerated in New York City jail since December 28, 2019. There are several things that I've noticed wrong in the system that precipitates violence and confusion, which has plagued New York jails for decades. The new law to eliminate segregation for all the most serious charges, if to not fail, must include these common sense denominators that need to be enforced. A liaison for the Board of Corrections as well as Department of Corrections to effectively ensure the new rules that will be implemented are actually followed should fall on the non-DOC employee liaison to report to prevent inevitable corruption and effectively reporting mismanagement. Any person who is contracted paid by DOC cannot effectively report on DOC when DOC pays and signs their paychecks. Retaliation in some form from the commissioner or wardens is inevitable. A non-DOC contract employee will be able to state facts without fear of reprisals, and then, incentivize programs. Simply eliminating punitive segregation is not good enough. I was there 3 times. The last time was 67 days, exceeding the 60-day limit, unlike what was falsely reported by Brenda Cook and Cynthia Brand on December 11, 2020. And punitive segregation, from the moment you're provided a recreational period, yard, shower, then maybe but not guaranteed day room, one hand shackled to the desk. Anytime out your cell, sit in the shower for an hour, waiting to be placed back in your cell, or later the day room, if lucky, does not qualify as the hours previously stated. The department considers any time out of your cell as a part of the time frame as recreation. When it is not, creating a new ESH is not the answer. I brought up the intensive transitional program implementing the DOC in Washington State Cohen Bay Correction Center, which it was originated, in which inmates can attend small individualized groups that are then provided working paid jobs in which responsibility is taught, encouraged, and supported, helping to change the mindset from that of desperation and completing the program just to get released, changing to reflection of one's behavior and changing it. Inmate-teacher correspondence is needed. There is no better teacher than someone who shares your experience. Allowing paid inmates to facilitate classes may prove more productive than a civilian or correction officer telling us we just need to simply change our behavior. It only leads to feeling judged, chastised, labeled, instead of helped and comforted, and then, in the sense of officer appreciation, we have officers in AMKC and Rikers Island, such as Camacho, Wade, the Dep Blacks of mental health, and Dep Hamilton, and others who are forced to work 24 hours, 72 hours straight beyond exhaustion, cannot effectively monitor and help inmates in that, that need help because they're not fully functional. And then you have what they call MMs, which are correctional officers who have been injured on the job or faking an injury, which just allows them to work with inmates, which then again allows them to work no more than 8 hours. It's not fair and causes staff shortages, which leads to unsafe living conditions. Shorter staff means no constant recreational periods outside of the housing area, no access to physically being in the law library, etc. Officers are short, and inmates' mandatory minimum standards are long disregarded. In order to effectively control the environment has to be understood. It has not been understood. All people hear is what they see on TV, whatever movies they watch, what they read in the newspaper. Nobody can help us but us. In order way to help us needs to be included in the conversation of the argument. Nobody knows what it's like for the people who are here now. Not last year, not last month. Oppression and suppression and regression of one's goals is constantly practiced in a daily goal in this Department of Corrections. We can't get help if the help is not understood of what we need. And it's an everyday struggle, it's an everyday battle. What can we do about it? What can be done about it? Segregation is a very small part. It's about what happens before you go to segregation. What happens after you deal with the traumatic experience of being out of segregation, what is to happen now? And that is never being addressed, never being understood, never even being brought to the attention. It is about the person who is going in, the person who's coming out, the person who just got locked up and knows nothing about anything and is antagonized and approached by several individuals in several situations and don't know how to handle it and comes out a whole different person for the worse. That is a situation that needs to be addressed. That is a situation that needs to be understood, and that's a situation that needs to be enforced. And I feel that if we can all come together as one and have someone that can speak for us on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis to let people know, hey, the rules you implemented, they're not following it, and this is why they're not following it. I can prove they're not following it. That needs to be done. If that is not done, these rules that are being implemented among others are not going to happen. Example, they have a tablet program which allows you to get your correspondence courses, to get college degrees, to be able to do things that help benefit you, to help you maintain and do the time and not let the time do you. They took those tablets away. So now people can't effectively do anything that's going to help benefit themselves. Instead, they're sitting in idle time, which you know what happens when there's nothing to do. You create something to do. And for some people, that's negative. So what do we do about that? How do we handle that? How do we understand and begin to comprehend what do we do when we have nothing to do? And that's all I have to say. And I'm just asking for the mercy and the patience and understanding of everybody that's listening and the people that have spoke to get more in depth and have a deeper understanding of what it's really like on a day-to-day basis. If you made a mistake, you're here. Now what? What do we do about it to correctly affect the change and to understand the deeper meaning of what it's like to be in here and how we're going to be let out eventually in our behavior and our mindset of who we are and what we're about when we get out, to be better to our community instead of hazardous to our community because our repressed rage and anxiety and feeling of overwhelmness, of sensory overload when we're dealing with sensory deprivation, which is jail. Thank you.
Thank you, Omari. Omari, have you seen the rules that were put out? They said the rules are in the law library. People have access to it. Do you know if folks have access to it?
No. The way it works is that I requested that from law library. Law library told me I need to FOIL it, Freedom of Information Act, which means that I have to request it and mail it in a request. Then I have to pay for how much it costs. Then I have to send it to my family. My family has to print it out and then send it to me. But there's an individual that I know of who helped me and gave it to me because he came to interview me regarding this situation. That's the only reason why I was able to get it. And no, those rules are not readily accessible or available to any inmate because it's for the inmate, which is why we don't get the New York Post, we get the Daily News. Anything that posts about the progression of DOC as far as inmates is concerned is not encouraged and is not involved in our daily conversation and communication. So the answer is no. It is very difficult to access the bare necessities to the change that's trying to be implemented by the Board of Corrections for DOC.
Thank you, Omari. Thank you. And thank you for calling in and sharing your experience.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Joey Jackson.
It doesn't appear that Joe Jackson's in the room right now.
Okay. Shona Hamady. You're muted. Okay, we might have lost her. She's gonna probably try to dial back in. Let's go to Katherine Sax.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Katherine.
Okay. Hi. So Shona and I are planning to testify in tandem. My name is Katherine Sax, and we spoke with a man who's currently incarcerated at Rikers. And over the course of several conversations, he shared his experiences with us, which we will share with you now. He had experienced several forms of restrictive housing and had given serious thought to the most dangerous harms he saw in the current system. And he'd also given suggestions about what he thought the most important changes would be. And we will share his story with you tonight. And if when I run out of time, just let me know and Shona will pick up where I left off if she can resolve her technical issues.
She's
Right,
back
I'm
on.
back here now. Sorry about that. Thank you.
Okay, we can swap or we can keep going this way, whatever.
I can pick up here. Sorry about that. I prepared this part of the presentation. Thank you everyone for holding by while my technical issues continued. So his testimony goes, I'm not different from anybody else. My family is not street. None of my siblings are street, and none of my family members have a history of being locked up. I've now been incarcerated for 4 years. Most of that time has been spent in restrictive housing. I spent 18 months in Albany County. I was in the segregated holding area from January 2018 until I was transferred to Rikers 18 months later. This meant I spent 23 hours a day in solitary. I had 30 minutes to shower and no outside recreational time. Now I'm at NIC at Rikers. The housing I was first put in at NIC was literally a cage. We were in 3-man cells, and 3 cells were in one cage, so 9 people in each. It's a tiny space, and we got 1 hour outside of our cell and came out for showers, but had no time beyond that outside the cell. We sometimes had programs for about an hour, but not all jails do this. Anytime another inmate was out of their cell, I wasn't allowed out of mine and had to ask an officer for everything. They would have to cuff me, bring me either to the shower or food or whatever I needed, uncuff me there, and bring me back the same way. At some point, there were new rules that said we had to get 4 hours outside of our cages, but instead they would bring us some of the rec materials like video games, and we'd have enhanced rec in our cells for most of that time, and still only get the 1 hour outside of the cage. I'm no longer in such a confined setting. Here there's no general population, but I'm in a dorm setting, and it's not as restrictive. Over the last 3 years, I've experienced a decline in my mental health. I get extremely agitated, which is exacerbated by everything in this setting. I get bad anxiety. You feel like you're trapped. You can't go anywhere. You can't move. At first, when I started living here, the confinement wasn't bothering me. I wasn't having these problems. But the longer I spent confined, the more it bothered me. I tried to find little things to do to get out. I've said I had chest pains just to get out of the room and wait in the nurse's office area. There's nothing to engage you to get your mind away from the tiny space and trapped feeling, like more regular programs or time talking to people from the outside who come in to run some of the programs. Recently, I spoke to a mental health professional a couple of times, but the conditions are so severe and they said there was nothing they could do about it. The problems that come from the environment won't go away unless there's a change in the environment. Security overrides everything, and it does not matter if it makes our mental health much, much worse. When I moved from the restricted housing into the dorm setting at Rikers, people I knew before told me I seemed like a different person, but there are people with so much worse mental health challenges than mine in restricted housing. The staff has no training to deal with them, which means they treat anyone acting violently the same way, even when the causes might be very different, like someone having a mental health crisis or just being angry and destructive. If someone's having a severe mental health crisis, they're not going to treat officers in the same way, and the officers need to know how to deal with that. There's some good officers, but there are also some who don't want to work or who'll come in a bad mood, and it shows. Beyond the mental effects, I've also experienced the physical side effects of long-term incarceration. I have persistent back pain that I didn't have from before from the extended hours I've spent confined in a small space, and I developed blood pressure problems in Albany and had to be started on blood pressure medication. These health effects are a problem for many of those people who live here, and those incarcerated generally, especially those in restricted situations. People who live in confined settings tend to have higher blood pressure and hypertension rates than people who are able to move around. The restrictive housing breeds problems. At some point in their lives, most all of the people are functioning normally, but here there's violence every day. Also, you're housed by the category of your case, which means that even if you yourself aren't a violent person, but you have a high-profile case, 9 times out of 10, you're in very restrictive housing. That means you're housed with very violent people. People set fires and do other dangerous things to get attention because human interaction is so limited. Also, thank you very much for your time. I'm going to pass it off to my colleague, Katherine, now.
Thank you. Katherine, you have 3 minutes and 43 seconds.
Thank you. I'll pick up where Shona left off with his testimony. Right now, the city is closing jails. They will put higher risk inmates anywhere in restrictive housing, and sometimes they put people with violent tendencies along with people who aren't and don't want to be violent. I've been involved in several conflicts with other inmates in the cage and in situations where I had to defend myself physically. If the guards know about it, they try their best to separate people, but often the guards do not know that violence has happened. They often don't even check. One inmate got slashed in his cell and nobody ever checked on him or found out. There's less violence between inmates and officers at NIC than other places I've been, maybe because of the cameras. The cameras are helpful for both officers and inmates because the officers don't assault inmates as often, and the inmates don't assault officers as often either. Officers still abuse inmates, but they can only do it if you've been resisting, and then they can use excessive force. I think the system needs a better way to keep violent inmates away from non-violent inmates based on their behavior and willingness to change and rehabilitate. There should be more people in general population as opposed to segregated housing, because those environments make people's health, mental health, anxiety, and behavior dramatically worse. More programs, time outside, interaction, and hands-on things to do, like exercise or the activities that rec staff do with us, would all help us engage and deal with the issues that get worse in solitary or restricted housing. Also, better staff training on mental health issues would be very helpful. I understand that these changes might be tough changes to make happen, but they're what I think would be most beneficial to the mental health and rehabilitation of inmates. That's the end of his testimony, and I'll just end with a few comments. His experiences seem to illustrate issues with the proposed reforms to solitary confinement. RMAS would worsen the problems he highlighted in our discussion rather than solving them. RMAS should not allow for indefinite isolation, which would compound the inevitable mental health problems he highlighted associated with such isolation. Out of cell time in another cage contradicts his emphasis on the importance of social interaction for mental health and should be with at least several other people. The reform should allow for meaningful out-of-cell programming activities, potentially comparable to CAPS in the New York City jail system as a model, particularly including opportunities to interact with people from the outside. The reforms proposed misunderstand or ignore the health needs of incarcerated people by limiting exceptions to solitary confinement under a new name to people with severe mental illness, especially since solitary worsens mental illness and, as he illustrated, can worsen physical health issues like high blood pressure. His proposals are reasonable and centered on actionable steps the Board of Corrections can take to make this environment less torturous. To echo some of the advocates who've already spoken tonight, we do not believe the current proposals go far enough. They simply repackage solitary confinement and perpetuate its harms in another form. We strongly recommend that you keep his experience and those experiences of other people who are incarcerated in mind when considering reform, as many of the advocates have testified more powerfully, I believe, than I have. He really hopes the system can change for the better, and he wants to be a part of it, and you can make his hope a reality if you take it seriously. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Katherine. We now have Joey Jackson with us. So Joey Jackson.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you, Joey.
Okay, great. I don't know if my video is working. Listen, thank you very much for the opportunity to appear before you. I just wanted to have a chance to give a perspective. And I happen to be a lawyer. I've worked with and for correction officers for over 20 years. And I think I just have some insights with regard to, how they operate, what they do, et cetera. And I just want to urge the following. I just want to make clear, I work with and for the Correction Officers Benevolent Association as counsel to them. I am, particularly proud of the new elected leadership, Benny Basio, and what he's been doing to bring just different changes to corrections. And I guess at the end of the day, I just want to shift the narrative a little bit. I know that there are a lot of people who are down on corrections and corrections officers, but I just wanted to give a perspective. And I appreciate this board. I know how hard you work. I know how, all of you, having your hearts in the right place and having to entertain a lot of thoughts and having to entertain a lot of different perspectives. But, this is a tough time for correction officers. And certainly, I get and understand inmates without question deserve all of our, respect, and they should be treated humanely. I equally, though, think that officers, should be treated humanely as well. And we're in tough times as it relates to that. I know we're looking at a number of reforms nationally, locally, et cetera. But when you look at the things that they're enduring, the triple shifts that officers are working, 24 hours a day, I don't know who can bear that indignity. It just takes so much out of them. And I think that we have to look and approach any reforms being mindful of our jail population. We're looking at a more aggressive inmate population than ever before. If you look at the mayor's management report of 2021, it indicates that those incarcerated on violent felony charges has increased by 23%. And I think it's, as a result of that, you have officers who are dealing with inmates and certainly trying to respect as much as they can, the inmates and what they're doing. But often you're dealing with people who are very unruly and they're non-compliant. And as a result of that, you see that violence amongst inmates has increased in and of itself by 15%. Again, I'm referring to the mayor's management report of 2021 over the last year, and officers are often needed to go break up those fights. And in breaking up those fights, they're subjecting themselves to harm as well. And so I just, there's this narrative that these officers are out here and they're beating people up and they're not caring. And I just need it to be noted that these are people who have families too, that have a love of their jobs, that are doing the best they can under very difficult scenarios and circumstances. And they're not looking to wake up in the morning and attack any inmate, or they're just looking to go and do their job and do it peacefully. If you look at the mayor's manager report with respect to gang affiliations, you see the gang affiliated population, and that's increased by 6%. And the reason I raise these issues, board members, most respectfully, is because any reforms, I think, it has to capture both sides of the equation. And you need to have incentives, and you need to incentivize behavior that allows people to ultimately, live in an environment that's where the inmates are living, where they're respectful of each other and they're respectful of authority. And as a result, everybody can, ultimately get along. And so when you talk about lifting reforms, there's different ways of doing it. But I just think it has to be done in a way that really keeps into account the difficult jobs that officers have. You look at officer assaults with broken bones, cracked ribs, bruised and swollen eyes. Assaults on staff, according to the mayor's manager report, are up 23% over the last year. They just have an incredible job before them. And if you look at it.
Thank you, Joey. We welcome for anybody. We got to hold to the time, but we welcome any written comments so that it will be part of the record. Thank you. Our next speaker is Winston Richards.
Stan, I'm sorry to interrupt. We have Assembly Member Kenny Burgess in the room. Can we call him?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bennett. Can you hear me? Can you see me? Perfect.
Yes.
Thank you, Vice Chair Richards and members of the board for holding this hearing on a very fraught issue. It's an issue that touches on a certain fundamental of our society: the humane or lack thereof treatment of those who we detain or incarcerate. I'm the New York State Assembly Member Kenny Burgos, representing the 85th District in the Bronx, which also includes Rikers Island. And I'm also the chairman of the Assembly Corrections Subcommittee on Reentry and Transitional Services. On March 18, 2021, the legislature passed Halt Solitary Confinement Act, which limited prolonged segregated confinement to 15 days and expanded the definition of such confinement in correctional facilities. And I believe this proposed rule change to restrictive housing in New York City jails flies in the face of the letter and spirit of the law. It is universally understood that solitary confinement is a practice that would be cruel and unusual by the most conservative standards, yet has served as the primary means of punishment within our jails and our prisons. It is a practice created to shelter the psychological and physical stability of inmates, which are mostly Black and brown people from our most vulnerable communities. It's a practice that is unnecessary and tantamount to torture. In fact, as the 2013 United Nations report put it, prison regimes of solitary confinement often cause mental and physical suffering or humiliation that amounts to cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment or punishment. If it's used intentionally for purposes such as punishment, intimidation, coercion, or for any reason based on discrimination, and if the resulting pain or suffering are severe, then solitary confinement amounts to torture. Under the proposed rule change, these restrictive environments are simply redefined as risk management and accountability systems, or RMAS. That I and many of my colleagues believe is simply solitary by another name. By merely creating cages within the vicinity of other cages while still restricting significant out-of-cell time and social interaction, this change still has the potential to drastically impact the mental and physical health of those in our jails. Further, the level system will undoubtedly allow, in some cases, indefinite confinement for these individuals. We cannot continue this practice of restriction in place of rehabilitation that punishes individuals by removing any and all social connections. Not only does the proposed rule change cost public money for construction of new restrictive units, but it also costs us something more, our perspective. Regardless of whether one cage is nearby another slightly larger cage for 60 days before changing to another level for additional 30 days, it is still a form of solitary confinement that limits opportunities for real, meaningful engagement in social programming. It perpetuates the concept of restrictive housing as effective corrections, but it is not. It is cruel and it is abusive. We as elected leaders are making real, intentional efforts to transform our idea of corrections, and a part of that transformation is changing the treatment of justice-involved individuals within our custody. After decades upon decades of studies and tragedies, we know that solitary confinement does not work. It simply doesn't. Further, I believe this proposed rules change won't work either. Therefore, I'm joining my colleagues, advocates, and those fighting for change in our correctional system in calling for the board to amend these proposed rules and commit to meaningfully ending solitary confinement in our city jails. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Winston Richards. We'll go on to, is Winston with us? We'll go on to Octavio Perez. Okay. Okay, let's go to Nicole Valentin.
Stanley, hang on one second. Bennett just got kicked out. So probably the reason you're not getting people is because he can't make them a presenter. So give him 1 second to get back in.
Okay.
A little technical difficulty.
Thanks, Meg.
Sorry about that.
Of course.
Winston Richards is not in the room.
What about Octavio Perez?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Octavio.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Richards, for hearing us. My name is Octavio Perez. I've been a correctional officer since 2006, and I'm here to speak on behalf of my fellow brothers and sisters who
Your audio went out, Octavio.
needs to be done, and counseling and other things do need to be done, but limiting the amount of consequences for people's misjudgments or actions, I think is the wrong direction. Punitive segregation is not solitary confinement, although that's what everyone would call it. Respectfully, if you commit a crime in the city of New York, there's some consequences, depending on the crime, depending on the consequences. And I think people are really misunderstanding that people, the difference between kicking a door and assaulting an officer, those are two different consequences, and one clearly is more severe than the other. The individuals that are NIC are not just average individuals. Those are one of the worst and more highly assaulted individuals. They're not there for breaking a window or kicking a door. They're there for highly assaulting other inmates, highly assaulting other staff members, both civilian and uniform. And it's not a once in occurrence that it occurred. They have done this several times. And to limit those kind of restrictions that we have is allowing the predators to go from one unit to another. And so instead of having a limited amount of victims, now they will be allowed to run rampant throughout the system because they are under the impression that there should be no consequences for their actions. And that's where I'm going to end it. I really do appreciate your time, Mr. Richards, and the rest of the board.
Thank you, Octavian. Our next speaker is Nicole Valentin. You may begin, Nicole. You have to open up your mic. We can't hear you.
I'm going to briefly try unmuting Nicole.
Okay.
Hello, good evening.
Good evening, Nicole. We can hear you.
Hello, hi. I'm a correction officer for the last approximately 6 years. And I've heard a lot of support for and against. But what I would like to say is that I just want to share a story that's personal to me. I have a 6-year-old son. I also have 2 nephews. And anytime they do something wrong, we speak to them as, you know, I as a parent, as along with my parents as well and the elders that are around us. We talk to them, but there's also a consequence for everything that they do. So at the end of the day, we do have to do some type of punishment. There's a timeout. There is not going to the park a day. There's maybe no sweets. And I think that there are a lot of emotions for and against. And I believe that everyone should be treated humanely. We are all human beings. We all have to give each other brotherly love. And we all want to do what is best for our community, our society as a whole, and to make our world a better place at the end of the day. And when you look at all of those factors involved, you have to have some type of rules, regulations, some type of punishment for someone who does something wrong. It's unfair for us to shun punishment or say that, you know what, someone should not be punished when they are assaulting not only staff, but also other inmates, because it's our duty as correction officers to protect inmates from other inmates who are assaultive. So at the end of the day, I would just like to ask everyone to really put all of their emotions aside, all of their perspective as what they think an officer is or what you think an inmate is, and let's just come together really on a clean slate, because we as officers, we do not go into our jobs to hurt anyone. I do it because I want to make a difference. I want to do what is right. I want to do what is good. And I'm not the only officer who thinks like this. There are a lot of us who come to work to give 100%. But every time we read the news, every time we speak to other people who are not really in the jail, a lot of the times it's like you get beat down day after day after day. Officers begin to feel like, okay, you know what are we doing? What are we doing wrong? That, why are people looking at us as if we are negative? Like if we are actually people who come to work to assault someone else's child. We all have children of our own, a lot of us. And even if we don't have children of our own, we have friends who have children. We have sisters and brothers who have children. So we all want to treat everyone we meet every day with respect. We want to show them a positive side. We want to show them brotherly love, not in the sense of, a wrong way, but a sense of encourage them, to tell them there's a better way to life. They can be the change. They have a lot of creative ideas. They can make a difference and a contribution to our communities. So I just want to go with that point that, we all, we are not, I'm
Thank
not
you,
saying
Nicole.
that there are some bad apples. Okay, thank you. Have a blessed
Thank you.
day.
You too. Thank you. Our next speaker is Talton Johnson III.
Sorry, I should have been more prepared, but I said what I had to say.
Thank you, Nicole.
Yes, good evening. How you doing, sir?
Good talking.
You hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, I'm Officer Johnson. How y'all doing, everybody? This is all I'm going to say. I'm gonna make it short and quick. There's a lot of factors that are being overlooked and missed. Yes, there's some truth to what's going on as far as like bad officers and bad apples, but it's not everyone. No one comes to work just to beat up inmates. You have people that come in to do their job and bust their butt every day to do the right thing, but yet and still you have a lot of disrespectful inmates out to hurt officers and all kind of things, because y'all have no idea what's really going on. The only way you're going to understand is if y'all sat in there for a full tour for 8 days and saw all the disrespect and everything that's going on. I mean, I feel for the families that lost loved ones and everything, but there's something I want to call innocent victim syndrome. You have to ask, what did these guys do to get put in the box, to get put in the bin, not solitary confinement? And some of the things I heard, I'm not going to sugarcoat it, it's made up lies. Like, we got to get to the root of everything and know the whole story before anybody cast judgment amongst correction officers. Because I see a bunch of stones being thrown at us, but nobody's really sitting back and looking in that mirror. That's all I wanted to say briefly, and I appreciate y'all for letting me speak.
Thank you, Talton. Our next speaker is Jahira Almodovar. My apologies if I mispronounce your name.
That person's not in the room right now.
Okay, our next speaker is Anisha Sabor.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening, Anisha.
My name is Anissa Sabor. And I want to say one thing. I'm a solitary survivor, and it makes my blood crawl every time somebody calls me out of my name. I'm not an inmate. I'm a formerly incarcerated individual who survived solitary. And for anybody to say that segregated housing is not solitary, they haven't lived it. And so that's the end of that. I want to talk about these rules, right? I want to speak specifically to the creation of these RMASs, because solitary is isolation. And if you put me in a cage with one other person, I'm still isolated. I don't think that makes any sense. I just heard somebody speak about behaviors. How do you actually think that you're going to change someone's behavior if you put them in a cage by themselves? Or if you shackle them to a table by themselves? What could they really learn from it? Really, we really need to start thinking of restorative methods that we could use. People make mistakes. They are not those mistakes. They are people. They are not animals, and they should not be treated like them. You know, I don't think that any officer that go to work every day go to work thinking that they want to harm somebody, right? But you have officers who do that. Officers who think that because they wear a blue uniform, that they just got total control of an individual's life. And you don't even know these people. You don't take time to get to know them. I'm not violent, I never was. But I've seen people just like myself who was not violent wind up in spaces like that. There's no differentiating when you get a ticket, whether it's a violent ticket or not. That's the only thing they talk about is the violence. What about the non-violent people who go into these areas, which they're now calling RMAS, who is doing more than 30 days and still segregated? I don't get it, right? What do we really want to do to end solitary? Solitary is isolation. Isolation is solitary. It's no different. What would be different is if we found a way to engage, that allow people to engage in meaningful human contact and to be able to be programmed where they can work on some of these behaviors, right? The gentleman said it best. The person on the inside, give them an incentive to go in and help these people understand the behaviors that they're doing is not good, right? Let somebody talk to them who can understand them. Give them a peer to work with. Peer works really well. I don't understand how the city can think about spending more money to build more cages, to put more people in, but you can't think about a restorative method to give these people some programming that could really help them to change the behavior and to make sure that they're well, mentally and physically. We talked about it. I mean, I'm repeating myself because I'm repeating people in front of me because everybody has said it already, right? We cannot use these rules as a method of restoring what they want to call safety to a facility. It's not all about the safety. It's all about people's mental health. It's all about people's health, right? And I bet you if you put an officer in one of those cages for the 8 hours and the 7 days that he just spoke about, he would not come out the same person he went in. And you got to expect that. Isolation is torture. It's mental and physical torture. We have to stop it.
Thank you. Thank you. Our next speaker is Darlene McDay. You're muted.
Okay, I'm sorry. Hi, my name is Darlene McDay. My son, Dante Taylor, died in Wendy Correctional Facility, upstate facility, in 2017. He was beaten, brutally beaten by guards, and then he subsequently died that same day. Yesterday, I heard the COBA president, Benny Bacio, say a few things, and I just wanted to comment on those. First, he said he complained that advocates advocate for people committing violent acts. And that's just simply not true. We're advocating for people to be treated like human beings. Okay, my son did not commit a violent act. A violent act was committed on my son. My son smoked, and that was it. And he didn't hurt anyone. He didn't do anything to anyone, and he was beaten for it. Okay, the system will separate violent people on its own. Okay, they worry about not being able to separate violent people. They will separate violent people. Okay, he also talked about the fact that they're housing people by gang affiliation. Well, if that's a choice that they made to house them that way and it's not working, they need to do something different. Okay? They need to not put new people in with those gangs then. You know, if they feel like they're going to bring them into the gang or whatever, they need to figure out a system that works better if it's not working the way it is. Okay? He said that he toured with advocates. I'd be happy to tour with him. I worked in a correctional facility for a short time when I was a nurse. I could do it, and I could show them how to do it better. So I'm here if he wants to tour with me. Okay, he also said he admitted that they weren't getting the minimum programs. And he said it's because they're short-staffed. I hear that the staffing is higher than it's ever been, but you know, that's an issue if they're short-staffed. But it should not fall on the inmates. I'm sorry, it should not fall on the people in prison. Okay, and the fact that they're short-staffed is causing more violence. He admitted that's causing more violence. Well, that shows you right there that there's a problem. Okay, if people are not getting their programs and they're getting more violent, we need more programs. That's going to help with the violence. He also said that some staff go above and beyond and use excessive force as if that wasn't a problem. But obviously that's a major problem. Okay, and the fact that they haven't been doing anything to these staff, that's where I have issue. No one wants to talk about people in prison that get hurt, okay? The people that they call inmates that get hurt, okay? They only talk about that inmates are hurting officers, but officers are hurting inmates. My son he ended up dead, okay? Ended up dead, and none of those people paid for what they did because of their union, okay? Then there was Shaki, Antoine, and she went on. And I mean, this woman speaks very aggressively. So I could only imagine how it would be to be around her as a person in prison. She speaks very aggressively. And she said, imagine being a victim of assault that leaves you with permanent bodily disfigurement. Did you see my son's head? Well, guess what? He doesn't have to walk around like that because he's also dead. Okay, so you want to talk about permanent disfigurement, okay? But yet they don't pay for it. So if they start holding themselves accountable, if they start holding the others accountable, I understand there's great people there, I'm sure. There's great people that work for the Department of Corrections, I'm sure, that mean to do the right thing, like the woman Nicole. She sounds like a lovely woman. But at the same time, don't call them bad apples. I've said this before, don't call them bad apples, because the good ones that turn a blind eye and don't say anything and don't do anything and don't come forward, they're just as guilty as the ones doing the assaulting. And we have to remember that.
Thank you, darling. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Bill Pepitone.
That person's not in the room.
Okay. Mike Kincaid.
Okay. Good evening. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good. Thank you. My name is Mick Kincaid. I'm an attorney, I'm a New York City resident, and I'm also a transgender man who taught classes within DOC for almost 6 years prior to the pandemic. I want to focus on in my comments tonight is the importance of having access to counsel and the importance of having access to programs. And I've grouped these two together because when they're provided in tandem, and I think everyone else has already spoken about this, it can create an enormous change in how a unit or a floor or even a whole building itself is run and how people feel about the interactions that they're having. You already heard from, I apologize, I don't remember his name, Mr. Moore, who called in from Rikers about the reality of whether or not proposed rules are actually available for people. They're not. I used to go into 2 different housing units twice a week, and those proposed rules of any kind were never available in there. Having access to this kind of information is already something that doesn't happen, but allowing it can make a huge difference. One of the things that I did in my programming was just sit and talk with people about things such as their rights as transgender people. And just having that time would create enormous differences in the tenor of the housing unit. There would be a lot of tension, there would be a lot of pending arguments. And then if we sat down together and we all talked, and I know that that sounds really silly, but it's true. If I approach them all saying, I'm also transgender, I believe every single one of you in your gender identities, and I'm here to affirm every single one of you in your gender identities. Let's talk about this. We could have amazing conversations about all the different programs and all the different types of access that are out there. And that would be a sharp contrast to what they'd all been receiving within DOC custody, where even people who are well-meaning will occasionally slip up pronouns, occasionally ask a very ignorant question that upsets people. So having either peer-led or third-party organization-led programs changes how everything within a unit operates. I haven't been able to go into RMSC since the beginning of the pandemic. I'm not allowed to, but I've been hearing from women who are still in there talking about how PREA violations increased when third-party non-DOC people stopped coming in, that fights got worse, that arguments that would normally become just verbal altercations would escalate because there was no third-party person to break up the monotony of the day. So if we want to really provide support and structure, we have to provide programming. And then finally, I want to talk about the right to having access to counsel and disciplinary proceedings. The number one thing that I have to disabuse people who aren't familiar with correction systems of when I talk about solitary confinement is that most people who haven't been through the system themselves think a judge puts you in solitary confinement. Most people don't know that that is not what happens. It's not even a judge. It's not even a third party. Most times, most of the time, it's a member of DOC who does it. So in no way is it fair. In no way is it, I often would counsel people when I would be helping them with their appeals or their disciplinary tickets, that what we needed to focus on is not whether or not they did it, but we needed to focus on whether or not DOC did things correctly in placing them in solitary. Because most of the folks I would work with would say, I didn't do it, I'm innocent. And I would say, but it's your testimony against the CO, and they're going to weigh the CO is heavier than yours. So we have to find all the details in here. And understandably, most people, when they go through disciplinary proceeding like that, they think their innocence should be sufficient to get them off. And there are enormous amounts of anger and panic, and then also depression, because they're like, well, apparently my innocence doesn't mean anything in this situation. I can sit here and say I'm innocent until I'm blue in the face, but I'm still going to go to the hole. So having counsel can make a huge difference, both in terms of understanding the process and in terms of providing, access to due process, which is really exceptional in these circumstances. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Our next speaker is Eugenie Montague.
The person's not in the room.
Darren Carr.
That person's also not in the room.
Jennifer Paris.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Jennifer.
Great. Good evening. My name is Jennifer Parrish. I'm the Director of Criminal Justice Advocacy at the Urban Justice Center Mental Health Project and a member of the Jails Action Coalition and the Halt Solitary campaign. I appreciate that the board considered the comments made during the initial restrictive housing rulemaking process and attempted to respond to those concerns. Unfortunately, the rule you've now proposed does not accomplish what so many people called for during the previous comment period, namely ending solitary confinement and ensuring that all alternative units promote rehabilitation and violence prevention by treating people humanely. The blueprint for ending solitary confinement in New York City jails put forward by Jack and Halt, which was endorsed by more than 60 organizations, as well as the City Council Speaker, Public Advocate, Controller, and other city and state lawmakers, set forth a vision for an alternative to solitary that's the opposite of isolation and punishment. An environment where people could have actual human engagement and programs to address the reasons that they needed to be separated and prevent future harm. In the blueprint, we pointed to the Resolve to Stop the Violence program, or RSVP, in the San Francisco County jails as a possible model. RSVP is an intensive 12 hours a day, 6 days a week program that teaches things like accountability, empathy, alcohol and drug recovery, creative expression, and some of the structural elements that brought about a shift in the culture of the RSVP dorm were consistent supervision and positive role modeling with staff and service providers so that everyone was communicating the same message. And the research on RSVP showed that this type of therapeutic community without cages and plexiglass achieved the goal of reducing violence. This is the type of transformational change that the community is calling for. Several correction officers have testified regarding their concerns about violence. Well, we're concerned about violence too, but we're not going to reduce violence by replicating the most restrictive environments in the jails currently. And that's exactly what RMAS does. Out of cell time in RMAS does not involve healthy interaction with others in an environment that promotes individual growth and development. There's no requirement for group programming. In fact, congregate programming doesn't even seem feasible in level 1. There's also no requirement that the unit have steady staff to promote consistency or staff buy-in. This environment won't create the real culture change that we're looking for. And even worse, the proposed rule abandons basic protections for people in punitive segregation under the current rules. Allowing 10 hours of out-of-cell time with one person who's nearby but physically separated does not eliminate the harm of isolation. If you're going to institute RMAS level 1, there must be an absolute limit of no more than 15 days, and vulnerable populations, including young people, elderly people, people with disabilities and medical conditions, must be excluded. In addition, the proposed rule does not include the essential protection which was promoted during the last round of rulemaking, which is access to counsel for those subjected to restrictive housing. The proposed rule includes an amorphous standard of, quote, documented intelligence that the person will engage in violence if they progress to the next level. People incarcerated in these units must be allowed to have their counsel involved in the placement review process so that they do not stagnate in RMAS based on an officer's belief that they may engage in violence. In addition, individuals should not be held back for refusing to participate in programming. Program participation must be promoted by having high quality engaging programming, not coercion. Moreover, you must not allow officers to strip search participants in RMAS as they go from their cells to the program space or the recreation area. Strip searches create the punitive environment we are trying to avoid. They're one of the inhumane practices that should be eliminated. I urge you to make changes to the rule to create a true therapeutic alternative and not solitary by another name.
Thank you, Jonathan. Our next speaker is Darren Mack.
Person's not in the room right now.
Stephanie Betances.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hello all and good evening. My name is Stephanie Betances and I am a mitigation specialist at Brooklyn Defender Services. In my role, I work alongside criminal defense attorneys advocating for court-involved youth, many of whom are incarcerated in the city jails. This board and this mayor taunt a false narrative that NYC is ending the use of solitary confinement, when in reality the rules legitimize the worst practices of extreme isolation by another name. I want to echo the comments made by survivors, family members, and advocates from these hearings who have described numerous flaws within the proposed rule. My comments today are based on the lived experiences of people in custody and will focus on the essential role of CHS. The proposed rule leaves critical gaps and we fear, as written, will embolden the ongoing gatekeeping by the department. The board must consider the following during the rulemaking process. The exclusion list is dangerously narrow. This list must be expanded and include younger and older adults, people with disabilities, and people with medical conditions. Additionally, the listed exclusion, people diagnosed with an intellectual disability, should be expanded to include all people with a neurological, intellectual, and developmental disability. The rule states CHS shall determine if a person meets the exclusion criteria but fails to articulate how and what tools CHS should utilize in making these determinations to ensure no one is overlooked. For example, if CHS is making determinations based on their last interaction with an individual, That interaction could have taken place weeks, maybe even months prior to a disciplinary incident. It's not uncommon for people to decompensate, experience trauma, or other factors impacting their behavior and mental health during their incarceration. In order for CHS to make an accurate assessment for determining potential exclusion, CHS should be required to meet with people in custody in private, confidential setting away from the housing unit and immediately prior to any placement into RMAS. The rule states CHS shall maintain a current list of all individuals with serious medical conditions and share with DOC so they can, quote, confirm signs of life. Services and limited movement in RMAS will be at the behest of correctional staff, making this a dangerously inadequate response to ensure people with serious medical conditions are cared for. DOC has an extensive history of failing to notify CHS and failing to respond to a medical crisis, which have resulted in death, most notably lately in Polanco. These rules not only allow but encourage DOC, rather than medically trained professionals, to be official gatekeepers to healthcare services. It confirms this board is not committed to necessary changes after the deaths of far too many New Yorkers in custody. I'll end on this. I have been working with a young man who entered a restrictive unit and quickly decompensated. Our office, including myself, tried on multiple occasions to meet with him, only to be told he refused. In a follow-up attempt, a DOC officer informed us that he wasn't going to make his visit because he was playing with his own feces. We notified the board and CHS and we're grateful he has since been moved, but he should have never been cleared to enter that restrictive unit. At the very least, he should have been removed immediately when there were obvious signs of decompensation. It should not have taken our office to flag this case for CHS to act, and we fear that what could have happened if we had not been notified. BDS has reported numerous cases of people decompensating, cases of people not receiving adequate health care or support, and cases where the person should have been excluded from day one. CHS failed them, and it wasn't until our office intervened did CHS respond to their needs. The board has an opportunity to drastically change how we treat people in our city jails, but the proposal does not address the already known and documented harms of isolation, nor do they address the fundamental role of CHS. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Michelle White.
That person's not in the room.
Ashaki Antone.
Good evening. Good evening, Mr. Richards and the board. My name is Asaki Antoine, and I am the first citywide trustee of the Correction Benevolent Association, and I am also a correction officer. For the past 6 months, during each public comment, repeatedly, the words demean, dehumanize, mistreat, and torture are used in a way to describe punitive segregation. With the increase of violence in the city jails, inmate assaults have increased by 284%. The reality is there are a group of inmates who engage in continuous acts of violence, who have demean, dehumanize, mistreat, and torture other inmates, civilians, and correction officers while in custody. These inmates prey on the weak, assault other inmates for fun. They bully the mentally ill, extort, threaten the timid, spit on medical staff, and physically assault correction officers. And boom, just like that, you're a victim. Where's the public outcry to protect the inmate, to protect the inmates who now unfortunately become a victim? I will also add the correction officer in that equation. Inmate advocates, where's your outrage? You can't advocate for the inmate and not the inmate who now become the victim of an inmate on inmate assault. It's a bit hypocritical. We all have seen horrific videos of correction officers viciously assaulted by inmates, unwarranted, I might add. We all have seen pictures of correction officers' eye sockets broken, teeth missing, officers attacked, beaten, countless testimonies from correction officers. I could go on and on. Inmates need to be held accountable for the crimes committed in jail. Regarding the proposed risk management accountability system, will this reduce violence in the jails? As I stated yesterday during the public comment segment, Chapter 6-22, proposed rule clearly prohibits the automatic monetary fine to all guilty infractions, only for the destruction of city property, and any imposition of a fine shall take into account the person's ability to pay. The reality and the message sent is that DOC property and the ability for the inmate to pay has more value than a correctional officer who are subjected to physical assaults and or possible bodily disfigurement while working on a B post. The message sent to a female correction officer who are sexually assaulted, groped, and looked at as sexual prey. Your predator must have the ability to pay. You don't matter. Another blame and shame game for the victim. For the record, as a woman, as a Black woman who happens to be a correction officer patrolling the toughest precincts in New York City every day, I am appalled, disappointed, and offended that this proposed rule is even a consideration. This is totally unacceptable. You have to do better than this. Keeping the monetary surcharge will illustrate accountability, real accountability. In conclusion, violence in the jails will continue to increase without proportionate consequences for inmates who violate the rules. Programming and rehabilitation is a good thing. However, we must be realistic and know that there are a percentage of inmates in custody who are not receptive to these programs. The inmates must be receptive to a program for it to work. When program and rehabilitation does not work, what do you do? As I stated yesterday, the proposed rulemaking does not reflect the appropriate accountability for violations of inmate rules. In essence, these rules have been catered to inmates and encourage the increase of assault on correction officers.
Thank you. Thank you. Our next speaker is Benny Basio. Benny, you have to unmute yourself.
I'll try unmuting to see if Mr. Bassi.
Thank you.
You're now unmuted.
Good afternoon.
Good evening, Benny.
Oh, I'm sorry. Good evening. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Sorry, I'm on my cell phone and I have a bad signal. Look, I spoke yesterday, and as you can see, we have a systemic problem in our jails. Our jails have been neglected for years, and this is the situation that we find ourselves in. Punitive segregation is a necessary tool that correction officers need to keep everyone safe for highly assaulted inmates that assault other inmates and correction officers. And, I hear a lot of the advocates talk about, that this happens to Black and brown people. This is why the inmates are treated the way they do. And the reality is that 85% of New York City correction officers are Black and brown people. And we endure so much in our system. And the problem is we're not part of this equation in reality. Like, I watch over and over Board of Corrections meeting month after month. And, the advocates talk about what the advocates talk about, well-being of inmates. You guys listen, but where's the real systemic changes that we need? Correction officers are working triple tours, not providing a meal break, dealing with gang members all day, highly assaultive gang members that the department is housing by gang affiliation, as I said yesterday. And I'll try not to repeat the things I said yesterday, but this is the reality of what correction officers are going through, right? So there may be something that we're getting treated the way we do. Inmates are not being provided the services that they have. Is it because we're a minority-based law enforcement union? Is that why the system, Rikers, has been neglected for years? No programming, right? Everybody wants to talk. We want programming for inmates. We want inmates to be cared for. We don't go to the facilities with abusing inmates on our mind. I've spoken to many inmates throughout my career trying to get them to better their lives. This is a systemic problem that we need your help, right? You guys are the Board of Corrections, but you guys have to help correction officers too. I've testified at city council hearings about, what you guys call solitary confinement. Even the administrative code says punitive segregation. So the law that's trying to be changed wants to change the language in the administrative code. So inmates are in the same cell with a window, they receive programs. And the reality is that you don't end up in punitive segregation if you don't assault anybody. If you go to jail and you follow the rules and you don't assault, you don't cut another inmate, you don't cut an officer, you don't end up in punitive segregation. Just like if you don't commit a crime in New York City, you don't end up in punitive segregation. So just keep in mind, we come from the same neighborhoods that most of the inmates that we house. So this notion that we want to abuse, our own people. I'm the first Latino president of COBA, and I was raised in the projects in the Bronx, in Marble Hill projects. So yeah, this thing that we're abusing inmates and we want to beat them down. Listen, people at times go over the top. Yes, we do have that, but they're human, right? Everybody makes, a conscious decision to commit a crime, and we're dealing with a lot. And we just want you as the Board of Corrections to take us into account, all right, to keep everybody safe, not just inmates. Like the city council predominantly wants to talk about the well-being of inmates. Talk about the well-being of correction officers as well, because we all want to be safe. And this constant neglect of our system, of the jails, we're all affected by that. Thank you, Stanley. I appreciate the time.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mary Rinaldi.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Mary.
Can you see me?
No.
Okay, let me try to put on video. Sorry, thank you for bearing with me on this.
There should be a start video button at the bottom of your screen.
Can you see me now?
No. If you want to go ahead and begin.
Oh, I see it. There we go.
All right, there you go.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good evening to the members of the board. My name is Mary Rinaldi, and I am an impacted person. A loved one of mine is formerly incarcerated and was placed in solitary confinement throughout their incarceration. I am here to register my deep concern with this proposed rule from Mayor de Blasio and the Board of Correction. Rather than end solitary confinement as claimed, this proposed rule extends and expands the use of solitary confinement under a new name, the Risk Management and Accountability System. City officials, the Board of Correction, and the DOC are well aware of the harms of solitary confinement. Numerous amounts of research have been done for decades, proving the harms of this tool of torture. And the UN has called it by its accurate name, torture. Yet here we are, yet again, retelling our stories, reopening old wounds, reminding you of the things you already know, so that more people are not put through the hell that so many of us have either experienced directly or via the loved ones in our lives. My loved one can barely speak of their solitary confinement, which was always done for their protection. It was so bad that the one time they spoke of it, they were so re-traumatized that our conversation devolved to me pleading for them not to harm themselves. Numerous times, I have talked my loved one through similar precarious moments, through agony and anger and despair, moments I wasn't sure that they would survive. Every time, after hanging up the phone, I worried that I might get a call that would blow my heart into tiny little pieces. It is unconscionable to listen to correctional officers who know day in and day out what goes on inside of our prisons and jails, to say that they need to continue using torture as a tool for their own safety. It is insane. My loved one has survived and they continue to survive, but they have been irreparably harmed. Their ability to mentally process the world is extremely limited, and their access to the internal tools and resources to begin and maintain healthy relationships is almost completely cut off. Holding a healthy conversation with them now is extremely difficult. The trauma follows them. It has changed them, but I haven't forgotten them. I still remember the real them shooting hoops with me when we were kids and wondering about what great things might be in our futures. I miss them, and I am determined, along with many advocates on this call, to fight a system or any proposed rule that traffics in punishment and torture, and that is what this new proposed rule does. What is truly needed are resources for healing and tools for restorative justice and accountability for those who are in positions of power, which includes the BOC, the DOC, and all the correctional officers that work for the DOC, and the Correctional Benevolent Association, and the mayor. I never want what happened to them, my loved one, to happen to any other person in the world, and definitely not to my neighbors in New York City. The mayor has said many times that he will end solitary confinement in New York City jails. In fact, in support of this proposed rule, he said, quote, "Now we are making good on our commitment to ban solitary confinement altogether." It seems the mayor did not actually read the rule, or worse, he did, and couched it in this statement with a promise he knew the rule would break. The proposed rule effectively empowers correctional officers to use solitary confinement on people in custody whenever and however they wish, with zero accountability. For example,
Thank you. Thank you. We encourage you to submit your.
And must be abolished completely in New York City. Thank you for allowing me to speak today.
Thank you, Mary. Our next speaker is Victor from the Freedom Agenda.
That person does not appear to be in the room.
Jared Trujillo.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Jared.
Okay. It appears that my video is not working, but that's okay. Anyway, my name is Jared Trujillo. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I am one of the policy councils at the New York Civil Liberties Union. I do want to say thank you for having this hearing. After Holt passed, because of the work and tireless advocacy of so many advocates, of so many directly impacted people, the Board of Corrections really has an immense opportunity, not only to enact Holt before it has to, but also to be a leader. While these proposed regulations might be well-intentioned, at the same time, there are several changes that need to be made in order to make sure that they do meaningfully in solitary confinement in New York City, jails. NICU is going to submit a more detailed written statement by the end of the week. However, I did want to touch on two big issues tonight. The first one is access to counsel. And I'll try not to repeat too many of the arguments that people already have made, but I do just want to note that this is incredibly important. Any proposed rule that's to take effect must give folks meaningful access to counsel in order for them to be meaningful. The reason why so many advocates and so many survivors tonight are complaining about the process is because this is a system that's enabled to live in the shadows. This is a system where impacted people. This is a system where people that are going to be placed into isolated confinement really have oftentimes no mechanism to know what their rights are, oftentimes make statements, not realizing that they can be used as evidence against them in any future criminal proceeding. They often don't even know exactly what their hearings are. Having an attorney would enable people to better navigate the system. It would shed light into the system. It would limit arbitrary decisions. And also it would really just at least give the appearance of a more well-balanced system. Right now, DOC investigates, they write the tickets, and they're ultimately judge, jury, and executioner for a real meaningful deprivation of people's rights. In order to correct that, having for these folks to have access to counsel is a minimum. And not only having access to counsel, but making sure that both their attorney and the incarcerated person have timely notice. They have specific notice of the allegations against them. Access to counsel for something that is so close to solitary must be meaningful, it must be complete in order for it to really have a positive impact on people. More than anything, so many of the public defender organizations in the city have said that this is something that they want to do. It's important to note that so many of the people that we're talking about right now are in Rikers pretrial. So many other folks that we're talking about right now are at Rikers because of parole violations. These are people that already have attorneys. However, their attorneys often don't even find out that they're at risk of being placed into restrictive housing units until it's far too late. I also just want to briefly talk about the treatment of folks in the proposed RMS. These folks need to have 14 hours of out of cell time, as well as 7 hours per day of meaningful human interaction. We see systems, we know that we can do this safely, and we see systems that provide people with meaningful programming to address the behaviors that led to them being in solitary in the first place without putting them in inhumane conditions that would only protect suffering. We can see the clinical access to punitive segregation program. We can see the RSVP program. We can look to other jurisdictions like San Francisco and look at their SAFE program, which are just much more humane ways to deal with alleged escalated behavior. And then finally, I want to echo other advocates and say how incredibly important it is for us to put for the board to put time limits on the time that people can spend in levels.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Minister Dr. Victoria Phillips, Miss V.
And that person's not in the room.
Okay. Our next person is Miranda Diaz.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, good evening. My name is Miranda Diaz, and I'm a New York City Correction Officer, and I have been on the job for 15 years. I have had the pleasure of working in several different facilities, so I have been able to see a lot of the different practices that go on. For one, when I started the job, I came on this job because I wanted to help. I wanted to be the person that was the listener, the person that was there to assist. And I'm having a hard time doing that. I'm having a hard time doing that because a lot of the individuals that are incarcerated, not all, are very, very angry. A lot of them are very disrespectful. And it's really almost impossible at times to do your job. Now, I try to do my job to the best of my ability because that's what I'm paid to do. But it's very unsafe in these jails. There's no way possible that we can possibly protect other individuals if we are not able to separate the ones that are causing issues and problems throughout the jails. I have sat with several inmates who have said to me that they would rather be isolated because they are afraid. The gang violence is out of control. We are outnumbered. I sat in a housing area yesterday with two other officers, and we were basically barricaded in. We were told that we could not leave because a lot of the individuals will use manipulative tactics to try to get what they want. I am not here as a mental health professional because that I didn't study that. I am here as a correction officer that just wants to be able to do her job. I want to go home the same way that I came in. And it's really, it's to the point where you can't. I do feel like we need just the mental health staff, but with everybody, so that we can figure out some sort of happy medium where everybody is to somewhat content. I mean, no, jail is not a happy place. So we're not going to all be content every day, all day. But something has to change because the way things are and the way things stand are not good. It is not safe. And again, I hear everybody talking about the individuals, but what about the victims of the crime? What about the individuals that are incarcerated that just want to do their time? Because there are a lot of individuals that just want to do their time and go home, and they can't. And the whole idea of commingling the young adults with the adults is terrible. A lot of the older individuals do not like that because why? When you try to service them, the young adults run out the house. The young adults cause a lot of issues, making it harder for you to program with the older guys. It's just, oh man, I guess I could go on for hours about what's right and what's wrong. I'm just here because, again, I just want to go home the same way I came. I don't want anybody to get hurt, honestly. I don't want other individuals to get hurt. I don't come here to abuse anybody. I don't come here, I don't go to work to do any of that. But I want to feel safe. So we have to find a way to make it so everybody is safe. Because a lot of individuals are not safe. A lot of officers are not safe. So something has to change. And I just ask that we continue the conversation and let's all try to get on the same page. And thank you for your time.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jesse LaChance.
Hi, yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, thank you. I'm actually going to read a statement from someone who is currently incarcerated at one of your facilities and has spent time in segregation. He says, I am 32 years old and was born and raised in Manhattan. I am currently being held at Rikers Island, where I've been incarcerated since August 2019. During my 19-month incarceration, I have been transferred to multiple facilities and lived within various housing units at Vernon C. Bain Center, Manhattan Detention Complex, and Otis Bantam Correctional Center, where I am currently located. I am currently in the general population housing, where conditions can only be described as disgusting. Although per COVID restrictions, the housing unit is only supposed to have 30 people, there are currently 50 people in the unit and no social distancing. They run yard here once per day, but it is often difficult to make it outside because our yard time is scheduled for 6:30 a.m. Since August 2019, I have been in segregation or the box twice for periods of 2 to 3 weeks each time. I only received a hearing for one of those days. I have been diagnosed with depression and bipolar disorder, and I typically have meetings with mental health once per week. While these meetings are usually helpful, it is really difficult to meet with mental health when you are in the box. Those meetings are weird because they come to meet you in front of your cell and an officer is standing right next to them, so you don't feel comfortable saying or disclosing certain things. When in the box, I did not always get time out of my cell each day, although some days I would make it to the yard. If there is going to be segregation, they should offer more daily groups and opportunities to interact with other people. The physical space of the box is also difficult. You are in a cell with your thoughts all day with no one to express your feelings to. This causes you to overthink things and can be really hurtful. Although we are supposed to get the phone 1 time per day, this does not always happen. Sometimes other people break the phone before you get a chance to use it, or the correctional officers just do not bring the phone to you. If a correctional officer has a personal issue with you, they may refuse to give you phone time for that day. When I am in general population, I get more time on the phone to speak with my family, which helps when I am feeling depressed. I get to be around more people who may crack jokes and help lighten your day and the situation. When you're in the box, you just feel like you are losing yourself, losing your conversation skills. Every day you wake up and feel less like a human being. Thank you.
Thank you, Jesse. Next speaker is Tahani Dunn.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay.
we can hear you.
Good evening. My name is Tahani Dunn. I am a criminal defense attorney and a prisoners' rights attorney at the Bronx Defenders. DOC's current disciplinary system in the city jails is purely punitive. It is about punishment, not safety, not accountability, and not about support. We have all heard DOC staff, including the commissioner herself, talk about the young people in restrictive housing as violent, dangerous, and as having no remorse, as if they are monsters that need to be caged and left to rot. This same rhetoric and sentiment are shared by the vast majority of DOC officers. As recently as last week, I was an earshot away from multiple conversations held by multiple officers of all ranks at 3 different facilities, whereby the reoccurring theme and statements were in sum and substance, who gives a damn about due process? These are criminals and this is jail. They deserve whatever happens to them. They don't deserve programming. Why should they have that? Why should taxpayers pay for that? They don't deserve to be put anywhere but in the hole and left there. This commentary illustrates how fundamentally misinformed DOC officers and staff are about constitutionality, about the law, and about how human trauma manifests. What this narrative fails to recognize, however, is that every single person in DOC custody is a human being with a story, a person who was not born violent and dangerous, but is responding to inhumane and cruel conditions, verbal and physical abuse from staff and other incarcerated people who are in there with them, and the never-ending anxiety and fear that is associated with fighting a criminal case while behind bars. It also fails to recognize that these people will not be in custody forever. The vast majority will return to their communities, whether in a few months or a few years. While we appreciate the board's efforts over the past year to create a new restrictive housing rule, the proposed rule remains completely in line with the punitive narrative perpetuated by DOC and does not provide adequate opportunities for someone to engage in programming and would provide support and behavior modification. First and foremost, it does not end isolated confinement. It entrusts DOC with even more authority and autonomy in conducting the disciplinary processes and restrictive housing placements. This is extremely problematic because DOC does not understand how to change people's behaviors and will continue to inflict the same punishments and expect different outcomes. And I would just like to reference the last correctional officer's testimony where she said, DOC correctional officers come to do their job. They're not trained to be social workers or doctors. I've had this conversation with DOC officers attempting to hear their concerns and listen to their experiences, but the conversation can never move past their intense desire to punish the people they are charged with caring for. They are resistant to the idea that the people in their custody are more similar to them than different. And finally, they cannot understand why their jobs need to include efforts that go beyond controlling the people in their custody. We cannot allow DOC personnel to have more discretion and more deference over the disciplinary system when they are completely unwilling to exercise care, compassion, and fairness towards those in their custody. The Department of Correction has shown that it cannot be trusted to provide meaningful due process without oversight. Since the creation of the Prisoners' Rights Project at the Bronx Defenders in the fall of 2019, we tracked our clients throughout the disciplinary process, and we have encountered a bewildering array of proven failures and incompetencies in the disciplinary system that could have been prevented if our clients had access to counsel. One of the most concerning aspects of the proposed rule is the inherent lack of checks and balances, or any true oversight over the disciplinary process. Without any time limitations on these new restrictive housing unit placements and without access to counsel, DOC has complete authority to allow people in custody to languish there for months and possibly longer. By refusing to implement a right to counsel provision, it fails to cure the arbitrary and capricious disciplinary process that railroads people in custody and leaves them despondent. In fact, the new rule expects even more from DOC in terms of conducting a fair and accurate fact-finding. My office is going to submit written testimony. Thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you. The next speaker is Lana Green Hunt.
Yes. Hello, how are you?
How you doing?
You hear me?
Yes,
How
we can
you
hear you.
doing? Okay, my name is I'm Officer Lana Green Hunt, and I just wanted to and I understand all the comments and all the concerns in regards to DOC and the inmates, but I just want to say that I've heard an inmate said that if I assault an officer, I'm just gonna get the minimum. So I just wanted you to just come and voice my opinion. And I understand the families of those that are incarcerated. And I understand also the officer, because when you're in the shoes, you understand much better, especially if you're walking in it and you're the one that's feeling it. But I believe that, and a lot of people, they don't believe in disciplinary actions. And in order for things to change, in order for us to improve, and I'm not saying, remove the program and I'm just saying that we need to implement something where people will be responsible or accountable for their actions. They can't just do things and think that they can get away with it and not have some kind of punishment for it. I know that the word sounds very strong, but some kids, some people, they learn by 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 implementing some kind of action towards it, and some people don't, because everybody is different. Everybody learn in a different way. But we have to have some kind of standard across where inmates will know that you can't just come in and assault another inmate or assault an officer and just get away with it, because that's their mentality right now. Their mentality is that if I do something, I'm going to get away with it, because I hear them all the time. And that's the reason why we have so many uses of force and assault, because in their mind they feel that when they do something, they're going to get away with it. So how do we implement, and how do we let them know that, listen, you're going to be responsible for your actions if you do something? We write tickets. Sometimes the tickets don't get served, and they just say, I don't care, it's just $25. So we need to try to implement something where they will know that, listen, if you do something, there's a consequence for that. And I feel for the family, because I've had a brother that was incarcerated, but I don't defend their actions. If they're wrong, they're wrong. But if you do something, why did you get into the prison system in the first place? Because you did something that you did wrong. So I just want to say that I'm not really supporting the punitive segregation, but I feel that there have to be some kind of consequences in regards to inmates that does, some kind of criminal act. All right. And I really thank you for allowing me to speak on behalf of the Board of Correction and everyone else. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Our next speaker is Jayette Lansbury.
That person's on the room.
Okay, Zachary Katz-Nelson.
Hello, good evening.
Good evening, Zach.
Hi, thank you. I'm Zachary Katz-Nelson. I'm the policy director at the Independent Commission on New York City Criminal Justice and Incarceration Reform, often known as the Littman Commission, after our chairperson, the former Chief Judge Jonathan Littman. Thanks for the chance to testify. I just want to know at the outset that we appreciate greatly the extensive work that board members and staff have put into developing these proposed rules. We know this has been no small undertaking. Solitary is unacceptable. It must be ended in all its forms. What we need is a system that, even while holding people accountable, maximizes human contact, access to programming and recreation, and adequate mental and physical health care. As other correctional systems have proven, that's how we better promote safety. The system we have today in New York City jails clearly is not working for anyone. And there's an overarching point I'd like to make, please, actually, before getting to the specifics of the proposed rules. Whatever rules are established will only be as good as their implementation. DOC today too often fails to follow policies and procedures due to a combination of mismanagement and lack of accountability throughout the department. We need a true commitment from the mayor and the DOC to change culture and operations and real steps to do so, starting with proper staffing decisions. We also need the department to do far more to prevent jail violence in all its forms. Moving forward, we would encourage the board to focus on ways beyond solitary reform to address the violence. Now, looking at these proposed rules, we believe we can do better than the proposal before us today. The rules have traded somewhat better conditions for far lengthier potential terms in segregation than today, indeed potentially indefinite terms. We need real firm caps on how long somebody can spend in segregation. Furthermore, the criteria to extend people's stays at different security levels are too vague. They leave too much discretion to deny someone from leveling up. Now, even as those criteria must be tightened to help ensure true due process, people charged with disciplinary offenses that could land them in segregation and people who are being reviewed for movement up and ultimately out of segregation should have the right to a lawyer at each of those stages. They should also have the right to appeal the decision to deny them movement to the next level of security, again with the assistance of an attorney. And then there's staffing assignments, which we all know is a massive problem for the department. The rules smartly require staff to receive specialized mental health, communication, and de-escalation training. Every officer should have that, frankly, not just ones working in these units. But until that day, the proposed rules will prove ineffective if they don't also ensure that DOC assigns properly trained staff to the segregation units on every shift. Whenever a specially trained staff member is not available to work, their replacement must have the same training. Anything else does a disservice to both incarcerated people and to staff. Thanks so much for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Zach. Ansar Andino.
Hello, good evening.
Good evening.
Yes, how you doing? My name is Ansar Andino. Thank you guys for allowing me to speak at this hearing. I'm a New York City correction officer. Been a New York City correction officer for 4 years. Before I was a correction officer, I had an extensive background in social work. And just from my perspective, I just wanted to share some things with you guys. Punitive segregation and its removal, I do see the call for it with the adolescents when we house 16 and 17-year-olds. But with the 18 to 21-year-olds, or young adults, as you guys label them as, we have restrictive housing things in place like Secure, ESH, True, and they're not effective. We still have individuals that are highly assaultives that are put in these housing units that have assaulted other inmates, and just from both sides, and have assaulted correction officers. A couple weeks ago in my facility, a fellow officer was assaulted for no reason, and to the point where he was sucker punched, kicked, beaten on the floor, and to add insult to injury, while he was semi-conscious, his OC chemical agent canister was taken from him, and he was sprayed by the individuals. And on the other side, I had an individual in a housing area who was beaten to the point, a young man who's just there to do his time and to fight his case, was beaten to the point where he suffered severe injuries to his face, where he lost complete vision in one of his eyes, and suffered broken bones. So where is the advocacy for them, and where's the advocacy for us? There is a small percentage, whether people want to acknowledge or not, we have individuals in our custody that are violent, and they assault staff, they assault other inmates, and sometimes to the point where they suffer serious and disfiguring injuries. It's not a pretty sight to see an inmate sliced, with his skin sliced open, which I have seen on a few occasions. It's not a pretty sight, and people have to acknowledge that these things happen, and the individuals that do these things have to be held accountable. And so the other restrictive housing units that we have haven't worked, and they haven't stopped the violence, and you want to implement another version of it, and it hasn't worked. So we just need more accountability for individuals like that in our custody. And we also have to stop playing in these false narratives that correction officers are the problem. Yes, we do have some. And the comment that was made earlier by the lady that we turn a blind eye, that's not true. And also, we don't work with every other correction officer in all facilities. So that's a moot point. So I just want to say that there has to be accountability, and there has to be something in place to keep these individuals held accountable. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Francis Gutierrez.
Okay. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Francis.
Yes, we can hear you, Francis. Okay, I don't know how to put my picture up, so or put the video on, so I'll just speak as is. I spoke yesterday, and one of the things that I was trying to raise as an issue is the fact that you claim in your document, in the introduction, you say that what you're doing is creating a more humane situation. You also said that you are ending solitary, and I was able yesterday to challenge that by talking about the cages within cages, the lack of genuine social interaction. But today I want to just look at the sense of what it means to create a humane policy. Humane means that you would be, that there's compassion, that there's caring, that you're not causing injury or harm or suffering. And yet it seems to me that there's nothing in your new rules that meets that description. I think you need to, in order to genuinely create a program that truly is humane, you need to have a better understanding and pay attention to who the population is that you're talking about. We live in a culture, in a society marked by terrible racism and injustice. And I would argue that most of the people who come to your facilities have been the victims of that unjust society. And as such, they have experienced considerable trauma, which as a psychologist concerns me,
because it means that I'm not even talking about the people with serious mental health problems. I'm talking about the general population, where I would suspect that given all that trauma in their lives, that they are suffering from some level of depression and hopelessness and some level of serious anxiety. And some of that would account for the problems you are trying to deal with. But unless you set yourself to understanding who these people are that you are trying to work with, you will not be able to establish a truly safe environment, one that is safe for everybody, hopefully. And instead, what you have, and you keep approving, is this an environment where all we have is control, punish, control, punish, control, punish more. That will never create a safe environment for anybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Francis. Thank you, Francis. Our next speaker is Kelsey Villavilla.
Hi, all. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Kelsey.
So hi, everyone. My name is Kelsey Diavila. I'm with Brooklyn Defender Services. And I first want to acknowledge the number of people who have testified these last 2 days, from family members to Omar and the other advocates. You know, it's been powerful to listen to so many people share their stories with us who have called out this deeply flawed proposal. It's both powerful and emotional because it signifies the enormous amount of pain, trauma, and loss that have been experienced by so many. In the last year alone, for some, this has been their first time engaging with the board, and they're doing so because their brother, was in solitary, or their sister died while in solitary, or their child died and they're looking for answers. People take time off work, they bear their trauma for us all to hear, and they continuously show up to speak directly to the oversight body of our city's jails. People come to you for help to prevent the horrors that they know all too well from happening to another family. And despite the number of deaths under DOC's watch, despite the number of reports from the federal monitor documenting the abuses under DOC's watch, despite the repeated warnings over what this proposed rule will create under DOC's watch, I fear that this board will falter to the hands of this mayor and this department, that you will choose to perpetuate a violent, punitive system over humane alternatives, because what you have proposed in these rules is extreme isolation, no matter what name you give it. It will be used indefinitely. It will be abused. People will languish, and more people will die. History has repeatedly shown us that the department is not capable of keeping people safe. And we're all here warning you. We're raising the flag because you all, as members of the board, have an opportunity to use your position to bring real change to New York City's jails. Changes to how and whether DOC is held accountable for the harm it causes. Changes to the way we address the systemic and cultural attitudes that lead to the widespread violence and dehumanizing treatment of people in the city jails. This is a far cry from current practice and from these proposed rules. Survivors and family members who have lost loved ones to solitary came from all over the state and worked for years to ensure HALT became law. And yeah, there's still some work to be done, but for once, New York is finally acknowledging the humanity of people we choose to incarcerate. I appreciate the chair's comments yesterday that with HALT's passage, the board proposed rule is being reviewed because, as written, your rule will be in violation of HALT when it goes into effect. The board is proposing isolation of 24 hours a day indefinitely with no meaningful interaction. Your proposed rule denies people access to congregate programming, yet mandates an undefined amount of participation in programming in order to level up. And your proposed rule denies people access to representation during disciplinary hearings. Not only do these rules fail to meet the standards imposed by HALT, but they go against everything correction experts, human rights advocates, mental health professionals, and most importantly, people with direct lived experience tell you about what works. The few who have spoken in favor of these rules have clung to the idea that this is about safety, but what's being proposed will not reduce violence, nor will it address any immediate safety concerns. Because if that were true, Why does the rule give the department 30 days, a month, after an incident to place someone into RMAS? This is not about addressing the immediate safety for people in the jails, and this proposed rule won't protect people from the abuses of DOC. They welcome it. These rules show no concerted effort to bring change to the city's jails, and RMAS is just solitary confinement by another name. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelsey. Our next speaker is Zoe Farkas.
Hi, is everyone able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I will be reading the testimony of someone currently incarcerated in Rikers, and my partner Constantine, who I actually believe is up next, will be doing it in tandem, and he'll be reading where I leave off. Before I do that, I just want to say we are not advocating for no consequences. We are advocating for no solitary confinement, which is defined as torture. No one thinks CEOs wake up in the morning wanting to hurt people, but the fact is that many do, and solitary is a way for them to do that. I heard one CO earlier tonight mention that it's not average people who end up in these situations, but I think it's pretty clear from a lot of the testimony we've heard tonight and the one I'm about to read that that's not true. So I'll turn to that testimony. I've been incarcerated since January 2017. I started in the Manhattan Detention Center and from there was transferred to OBCC, GRVC, AMKC, back to GRVC, West Facility, NIC, back to West, back again to NIC, MDC, and I'm now back in NIC. I've been held in solitary confinement at GRVC and West Facility for a total of 20 months. I was sent to West Facility for 18 months. West Facility is for people with communicable diseases, but I don't have a communicable disease. There was no reason to send me there. The normal living conditions of the West Facility are identical to solitary confinement. At GRVC, when they put me into solitary, they would tell me it was for 30 days. But in West, they don't tell you how long you'll be in solitary confinement since it's not technically the box. Solitary is bad when it's just 30 days, but it's torturous when you don't know if it's going to end. The bouncing around more than 7 jails with Rikers and spending almost 2 years total alone, locked in a cage, has been destructive to my emotional, mental, and physical health. I am not being rehabilitated. I'm just slowly and brutally withering away. Solitary confinement's most significant impact has been on my emotional health. Having spent almost 2 years in a cage by myself has left me afraid of relationships, paranoid, and feeling empty. I've spent countless hours talking and crying to myself. I've spent countless hours angry at how cruel this punishment is. I've spent countless hours hearing the wails of other inmates in surrounding cells. I knew going to jail meant losing my liberty. I didn't know it meant losing my soul. We rarely get access to books. The 1 hour day outside our cage, if we are even given that hour, often involves just being put into another cage that is more public. The misery of solitary confinement is a full 24 hours a day. After the almost 2 on and off years in it, I feel as though the damage is irreparable. When I left solitary confinement and returned to the general population, I was losing my mind. I was paranoid, uncomfortable, and I didn't want to see it. My legal aid lawyer helped me a lot in getting used to being around people again. She asked me how I was doing and helped me feel a bit normal again. Even so, it still took about 6 months to feel any kind of normalcy, but I'm still not like I was before. The box made me a darker and emptier person. And with that, I'll turn it over to my partner, Constantine, who will read the second half.
My vision has started to fail me. I am sure this can partially be attributed to fluorescent lights, being lost in a sea of bright white lights day after day, month after month, year after year has caused my vision to decline. So has being at the mercy of a prison guard's decision about when to turn off the lights. When in solitary confinement, the lights just abruptly shut off at night and they don't turn back on until the next morning. We just sit in the dark, alone with our thoughts for 10 plus hours. The tedium of jail is overbearing. What are we supposed to do in these 10 plus hours of darkness? Sleep? It can be hard to sleep when you're caged for 23 hours a day. One of the only possible distractions is reading, if you're fortunate to even have a book. But that requires relying on the little moonlight in the room, as well as a lot of squinting. There is no lonelier place in this world than being caged in a cell by yourself. There's no peaceful sleep while in solitary confinement. Sitting by myself at night in the dark, choosing between sitting with panic attack inducing thoughts or squinting my eyes in search of a momentary distraction is a lose-lose situation. In addition to my vision deteriorating, my overall physical health is deteriorating too. The emotional tax of having been in solitary confinement has altered my eating habits. I've gained excessive amounts of weight and am now clinically obese. Moreover, the stress of being caged by myself combined with the weight gain has caused me to suffer from high blood pressure. And because of the many mental health issues that I have caused or exacerbated by Rikers, I've sought treatment but have only been fed pills. The doctors make rounds to treat people, but if you say you're depressed, they'll just try to give you every drug without actually trying to find out what works best for you. The most popular drugs prescribed are Remeron, Paxil, Prozac, and Seroquel. I was prescribed Prozac, Klonopin, melatonin, and Benadryl. There's no real mental health care here. Instead, mental health workers just prescribe drugs to solve these problems. This has led to my benzo dependency. People start losing their minds in the box. They get more aggressive and start doing things like throwing feces. Actually, there can be a benefit to making trouble because officers are more willing to help you in order to keep you quiet. But in the West facility, there were no cameras and COs would retaliate. Being in the box doesn't benefit anyone and strongly works against the supposed rehabilitation goals of prison. There's no rationale for punitive segregation and it should be outright abolished. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Pamela Drayton.
That person's not in the room.
Okay. Marco Barrios.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Marco.
Good evening. Thank you for having me. Wow, it's a lot to hear here tonight. My name is Marco Barrios. I'm a criminal justice advocate with the Urban Justice Center Mental Health Project and also a member of the Freedom Agenda. The last time I made a statement, testimony was about 2 years ago, so I want to just read a little bit about that. I ended up doing 24 years and 6 months. And I came home in 2017. I was very fortunate not to end up in a box. However, I saw so many individuals going into the box, some who I would call friends that shouldn't be in the box, and others who just did some infraction. But when they came out, they didn't come out better. There was no way I saw any rehabilitation. In fact, I didn't even feel safer, and a lot of individuals in the facilities didn't feel safer. And I'm sure correctional officers as well. Now, I asked myself, because I also a disabled veteran, and prior to my incarceration, I worked at I was a medic at the POW camp, and how we treated prisoners there. It's a shame to see that we treat people in this country fighting for this country, it was a pleasure and an honor. And we treat people like animals in these facilities. I was just fortunate not to end them in that box. And when they come out, I tried to even do peer counseling and even pray for them. And to this day, I'm not even bitter or angry at what happened to me. And when someone said about advocating for everyone, I do advocate for everyone because I feel everyone should have safety. But torture is not the solution. This is torture. Even though I was in a box, I experienced key blocks, like 20 days. I went to disciplinary hearings, which I would address in a minute. But there is blueprints. There's other states that have ended solitary confinement, and I know the fear. Sometimes fear and the power to control gets the best of people, their judgment. But there is a solution. One of the three things I want to address regarding the RMAS, which when I read it, I couldn't even sleep. Was the council. I think people spoke about having council at the disciplinary hearing. Staff, so when a person gets in trouble, misbehavior report, it's another person in staff who's going to do the hearing. You go in there, you're guilty. You got to beyond, I don't know, I went into Keep Light just for not doing anything, but the staff said I did it, so I was found guilty. I'm not saying everyone does. But having counsel will hopefully change that due process. And when you're in a hearing, you'll have the tape recorder on, because they'll take that tape recorder off sometimes. And they'll not call witnesses, a whole bunch of other things they'll do. And they should also be counsel for throughout the placement review or process. Now, it's hard for you to fully understand unless you've been in my shoes. And I was continue saying that, with due respect. But the second point I want to bring up is the refusal to participate in rehabilitation should not keep people from moving from level 2 to level 3 or from level 3 to general population. And the reason I say that is because, again, unless you've been incarcerated, the experience, the hostile environment, the depression, the stress, it's words can't really describe it. So when you're going into these RMAUs, and you don't want to go to program because you might not be in the right state of mind, or you physically, really, you're going to be punished for that? It should be rehabilitative. And the last thing is about a steady staff. I just want to say one last thing. The steady staff, everyone knows who's been incarcerated. If you don't have proper training and professionalism, get another person in there. It's ridiculous. It should be a steady staff. You're welcome.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Rashenda Kramer. And just as a reminder, everybody, if you have testimony, you can submit the testimony, and your full testimony will be part of the record. Rashenda, can you hear us?
I'm gonna unmute Rashenda briefly.
Okay.
Okay.
You're unmuted now.
My name's Rashenda Kramer. And for 10 years after I retired, I was a volunteer with American Friends Service Committee in Newark, where I spent some time each week reading and answering letters from prisoners all over the country, most of whom were in solitary. And over the years, I learned of the suffering of this inhumane treatment. When I read the description of the BOC plans, like everybody else, it struck me that there's remarkably little difference between SHU and risk management accountability system. And the damage kept to the people will be just as great as it is at present. And in many ways, these changes are worse. The general limit now is for 30 days, but the proposed rule under RMAS is 60 to 120 days, and a person could be held indefinitely. Maine, Colorado, and Mississippi are 3 states which have significantly cut down on solitary confinement and have all experienced a twofold benefit, despite the initial fears, especially those of the corrections officers. In addition to saving money, the level of violence diminished in the prisons, and also the noise level went down. Where there was more programming provided, the recidivism rate decreased as well. But RMAS wants to construct new punitive and isolating units, which will simply add more to cost, both in human terms and financial ones. I recognize that the BOC and the COs are afraid of changes. People are generally afraid of change, especially when that restricts their power. But who benefits from the current system? Do people who are kept in solitary become socially responsible human beings? What is the purpose of prison? Does dehumanizing people by shackling and chaining them in solitary reduce their anger or help their mental illness, reduce their violence? Prison terms are often extraordinarily long for often non-violent crimes. Would it not be better for prisons to try and change people to be better citizens, encouraging social intercourse and offering meaningful occupation rather than by keeping them like zoo animals, especially those in Rikers who have not yet been charged? Rejecting these BOC recommendations would be a start. The COs would also benefit, as we've been hearing tonight, how afraid they are, and that they view that this system is their only savior. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Vincent Capers.
That person's not in the room.
Scott Halterich.
Thank you. I'm going to attempt to share my screen if I can. Can you all see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Thank you all. These are photos obtained via FOIL of the NIC structurally restrictive units. These are the units that people in RMAS level 1 under the proposed rules will be held, potentially indefinitely. The picture you are seeing is where people will be locked alone for their so-called out-of-cell time. I'm going to show one other picture that also shows that cage. Being locked in this cage, which appears to be even smaller than the cell the person will otherwise be in, is not and cannot be considered out-of-cell time. This tier of cells, where people are individually locked in each cage, does not allow for meaningful programming or meaningful human engagement. It can't. With people locked alone in this cage as out-of-cell time, even the recently enacted Halt Solitary Act would prohibit even 1 day in RMAS level 1. People who have testified before the board, including people who have lived through solitary, family members, advocates, and correction officers, have raised two fundamental questions for this board to consider. The first is, how do our city institutions, using city taxpayer dollars, treat people in their care? Do they treat people in custody as human beings or as something less than? The second fundamental question is, how does the city improve safety in the city jails and in our outside communities when people in the jails return home? Fortunately, the answers to both of these two questions are perfectly in alignment. All evidence and science shows that treating people as less than, punishing and isolating people leads to more violence, not less. All evidence and science, by contrast, also shows that treating people as human beings, providing real opportunities for meaningful engagement and programming, dramatically reduces violence. Dr. James Gilligan, who has run entire state prison mental health programs and has studied violence for decades, writes that, quote, "Far from preventing violence, punishment is the most powerful stimulus to violent behavior that we have yet discovered. Punishment does not prevent violence, it causes it, in addition to being a form of it. Recalling his experience observing what happened in incarceration settings, Dr. Gilligan wrote, quote, "The more violent a person was, the more severely he would be punished, and the more severely he was punished, the more violent he would become. This endless, mutually self-defeating vicious circle kept both people incarcerated and prison officers in a chronic state of war with each other, which was the opposite of what they both said they wanted. This board can take steps today in the direction of both treating people as human beings and reducing violence. This rule does not do it. This rule will continue to subject people to torture, and it will continue to perpetuate violence. Isolation and punishment isn't working now to reduce violence, and it will not work to replicate the same systems in another form. The RSVP program in San Francisco jails, without restrictions on out-of-cell time and instead meaningful human engagement, saw dramatic reductions in violence. CAPS, right here in the city, jails, has seen reductions in violence. The Merle Cooper program in a New York prison that separated people without isolating people and had programming and empowerment-based opportunities with people even earning the ability to lock or not lock their own cells, was praised by participants, security staff, and the administration. If you want to treat people as human beings, and if you want to reduce violence, then this board can ensure that all people separated from the general population have at least 14 hours out of cell per day, with access to at least 7 hours of congregate programming and activities without having to be strip searched before going to such programming, with strict limits on the time in any alternatives, and with access to counsel before being held or kept in alternatives. I ask
Thank
you, I'll finish right now. I ask you to follow your moral compass, follow the evidence, follow the science, and do what is actually known to be right to both reduce violence and treat our fellow New Yorkers as fellow human beings. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Our next speaker is Deanna Hoskins.
Deanna's on now.
That person's not in the room right now.
She's not in the room? Okay. Our next speaker is Kezia Norman.
Good evening. Thank you so much. My name is Keziah Norman, and I want to start by saying, yes, thank you. I want to start by saying the name of the agency is the Department of Corrections. You're supposed to be correcting people's behaviors, not subjugating them or torturing them. Currently, my husband is in a SHU facility, and earlier it was stated that many of the people in these facilities, many of the prisoners who go into solitary because they assault someone else or something like that happens. That's not what happened. He's at an upstate facility, but the story is the same. He was actually retaliated against because he spoke out about coronavirus, COVID-19 precautions, officers not wearing officers not wearing masks. Because the officers got upset and they were mad that I, who work for WHCR, created stories and articles which they said to him they actually saw. He ended up being attacked by 4 prisoners, and he was the only person that ended up in the SHU. And when it was time for the hearing, they were so upset that he actually went through with the hearing. When he filed for not legal, but he filed to have an officer bring him the documentation, they never brought the documentation, they never sent the officer. So how can you actually have a hearing when the same person that's the judge and the jury makes the decision? And so it's a process that's not fair. Now, I understand tonight there are many officers who were from Rikers and they were complaining. I just want to say he spent about 3 years on Rikers Island pre-trial. We'll say this, not all our officers are bad. We understand that, but we're not talking about officers individually. We're talking about a system, the Department of Corrections, which gives space for officers to abuse people, for abuse to happen. And so what we want to do, what we want to say tonight is that solitary is inhumane. He's currently in solitary until July. He doesn't eat meat, which means he hasn't eaten in days. He's not able to bathe. These are, and he was in there with someone else. So I guess this is a different, situation when there are two people in solitary, which is even crazier during a pandemic. What I want to address tonight is that if it has been deemed inhumane, and we've heard so many stories of situations where people are losing their minds inside of these facilities, why are we continuing to create these situations, create this type of rehabilitation? We need restorative justice. We need programs. If there are people who are in gangs or they're doing violent things, let's pump programs into the situation instead of abuse. Like the gentleman before me, abuse brings more abuse. You're creating angry people. So tonight, I just offer my testimonial. I hope it's been truthful and accurate, and and I thank you so much for taking the time to listen to me.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your story. Our next speaker is Lionel Cumberbatch.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good evening, and thank you very much for taking my testimony. My name is Lionel Cumberbatch. I'm the Financial Secretary for the Correction Officers Benevolent Association. And in my 34 years on Rikers Island, which is more than anyone that was here this evening spoke, I'll say it again. I've been on Rikers Island more than anybody here who spoke yesterday and today. The New York City Department of Corrections has never helped inmates reacclimate back to society. All it's ever done was hold people until whatever the outcome of their circumstances are. No, there aren't a lot of correction officers that come to work who want to give consequences to inmates. But I am a part of this society, and I am, in my 34 years on this job, unsafe to go to work. Mr. Richards, I'm your brother. I'm your neighbor. I'm the guy across the street. I'm the guy you borrowed a screwdriver from that I want back this weekend. I go to work and run the risk of not coming back to get my screwdriver from you, Mr. Richards, because of the culture itself of Rikers Island, which is unsafe for everyone. For everyone. As a whole, inmates are taken out of their cell areas or allowed out of cell time for approximately 16 hours a day. There aren't enough programming for these incarcerated here on Rikers Island as they have in other states, as they have up in the state of New York. If an inmate is being programmed, he's less likely to get in trouble. He's less likely to get gang affiliated. He's less likely to go forward with his life and see beyond the wall of Rikers Island. That's what's not being introduced here. Is there supposed to be consequences for the inmate who's sleeping next to the inmate who just wants to do his time? Yes, there is. For all those that don't understand that, the general populace of Rikers Island does not go to punitive segregation. It is a small amount of inmates there that make it uncomfortable for those that are trying to do their time and trying to go home. That is not understood here for some reason. Mr. Katz-Nelson had it right. All of us have to be safe. The inmates, the clinicians, everyone. Where is the medium for all of us? I come to work one day. I have a few words with an inmate who didn't like what I said. He waited for me for my 2 days off, in which he gave me a defecation cocktail. He waited for me for my days off to come back in order to throw whatever he wanted to throw on me. They removed me from the housing area, not the incarcerated person. I got stuck for a double. Somebody called out sick. I had to take another housing area. He was in this housing area where he continued his abuse. Where does he go, Mr. Richards? I need help. I need the Board of Correction to help the 53% of single women that are holding down the Department of Corrections right now. I'll say it again. 53% of the officers that are on Rikers Island are women who just are taxpayers trying to send their kids to college, trying to be a homeowner, who are not coming into harm's way. Regressing back to when I'm at the dentist, I'm watching TV and an MTA worker said, I didn't come to work as a conductor to get spit in my face. Everybody in the dental office was appalled. Oh, I can't believe he got spit in his face. A conductor? Could you imagine looking forward to this every day as a New York City correction officer?
Stanley, you're muted.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, Lionel.
Thank you.
Minister Dr. Victoria Phillips is with us, Ms. V.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Ms. V.
Peace and blessings, everyone. Sorry, been working around the clock. I'm Minister Dr. Victoria Phillips, and I work at the Mental Health Project Urban Justice Center. I've been testifying in front of this board for many, many years, over a decade now. I've done cognitive behavioral therapy in prisons and in jails, including Rikers Island. I started first working on Rikers Island in nursing. Through nursing agencies. I did nursing for well over a decade in ER, ICU, and psych wards. And I'm mentioning all of this because so often we hear the formerly incarcerated, we hear officers, but you rarely hear civilian staff having the guts to come on record and speak the truth that they see behind the walls. And I started doing that a decade ago while still working directly behind the walls. And it was important to me as an Army brat to tell the truth of what I witnessed, because so often formerly incarcerated people come out and they're not believed. It seems so horrific, the things that you might hear someone say they've been through. And as someone who's never been incarcerated, it's truly, truly hard to believe that in America, we could treat incarcerated individuals the way we do. You will have officers speak to this board and city council as if they're the only profession to ever deal with someone with severe mental illness, that they're the only profession to ever have to deal with someone throwing feces or urine. And you have to ask yourself, why is someone throwing feces or urine? Are they that backed against the wall? Are they that tortured that they feel they have no way to act out, to get a response from someone higher up to come and witness what they're going through? Or are they going through so much in their mind that they should not be in this environment to begin with? And so as a nurse, I've been hit with feces. I've been thrown, sprayed with urine. I've been vomited on and everything. But never, never, never did I think, should I beat someone to a pulp? Should I dehumanize someone? Should I lie about what they just did to me or said to me in a room and exaggerate it to the point where the hospital police come? Or when I was working in MICA shelters, the security officers would come. Never did I think that I should exaggerate it past what was given because I was in a professional role. So yes, we do have to hold officers accountable. Yes, they are accountable when they sign up, when they're trained, when they're told this is what could be expected on the job, and they still agree even after probation to stay on as an officer. Should it be allowed to happen to them? Absolutely not. But is it a possibility in that role? Absolutely. Should we condone and should we ignore the abuses that will follow if an officer is treated in that manner and they step out of their professional title and become a criminal? No, we should not allow that to go. Should we believe the federal monitor's reports when they give us time and time again every 6 months validation on all the stories you've heard all the years? Yes, we should. Should we continue to traumatize our community members when they pour their hearts and soul out to you to tell you their truth time and time again? When you say repeat it because we're working on a new rule now, and forget that you traumatized yourself 6 months or a year ago. We need to hear your trauma again, and yet you do nothing. No, we need to hold you accountable as well. So I tell this board, please, please, I have passion, I have fire because of the things that I have directly witnessed behind the wall. I've been threatened by officers because of the things I've witnessed. And I want to tell you one last thing, and I'll finish here. The respect that they give their women officers in front of you is not even what they give them behind the wall. Many male officers start issues. Many male officers, I've even testified, would joke that you make enough as a correction officer to have a girlfriend, a wife, and a mistress. So these are the things that they joke about. When you take their days away, they say we'll just do overtime. And I've advocated for officers as well. Do your job, please. Humanity is depending on you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Anna Shifter.
That person is not in the room.
Hilly Haber. Haber.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm Rabbi Hilly Haber from Central Synagogue in Manhattan. I've spent time on Rikers Island as both a teacher and a volunteer chaplain. It is my honor to join my voice to all of those who have spoken tonight. Thank you so much for holding these public hearings. We've heard so much important and primary text, lived testimonies, obviously the most important source of information, but I also want to add some testimony from scripture. The practice of solitary confinement in New York City is a moral crisis whose very existence runs counter to the ethical order of God's created world. From the beginning of Genesis, we watch as God builds the world step by step, accentuating each moment of completion with the words, Vayar Elohim ki tov, and God saw that it was good. It was good as the refrain of creation. Over and over again, God's universe is created to be good. As the work of creation continues, God makes humankind in the divine image, and for the first time, something is not good in the world. Lo tov hiyot adam levado, it is not good for a person to be alone. On this verse, the Ramban, a medieval commentator, writes, the purpose of human life, life which reflects the divine image, cannot be carried out by being solitary. The moral order of our created world demands a life of community, of partnership, and of relationship, of mutual care and compassion. The practice of solitary confinement runs counter to the divine architecture of our universe, and the consequences could not be clearer when we listen to the voices of those who have experienced and lived through the days, months, and years of solitary. Solitary confinement is a practice of torture which goes on every day in our city, in our state, and across the country, which leads to lasting physical and emotional harm and illness. It is a spiritual and physical deprivation and degradation whose ongoing effects follow a person for the rest of their lives. It is a practice, as we've heard, which makes New York City jails less safe and more deadly, and it must be abolished completely in New York City. The proposed rules create extremely restrictive environments that amount to solitary confinement by another name. They perpetuate extreme forms of isolation and even imagine the construction of new forms of inhuman housing units. This rule would restrict access to meaningful programming and also legal counsel. In line with the mayor's and the Board of Corrections' promise, the board must amend the proposed rule to actually end solitary confinement once and for all in New York City. Our world was created to be good, and our divinely imbued purpose here is to protect and carry out that moral order. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Pooja Gold.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I'll be testifying with Tina and Dodd, so if they could get access to their video and audio as well, that would be awesome. The three of us are members of New York University School of Law's Solitary Confinement Project, which is a student-led group dedicated to the abolition of all carceral institutions. And we believe that abolishing solitary confinement in its entirety is a crucial step in that direction. Our group has on numerous occasions, including tonight, shared testimony before your board, articulating the abuses that individuals have endured as a result of inadequate due process in solitary confinement. These abuses include, but are not limited to, a lack of notice or explanation for their isolation, time in solitary without a meaningful chance to share their experience in a hearing, or oftentimes also unanswered appeals. This year, we were given the privilege of working with the Halt Solitary Campaign and Jails Action Coalition. We were honored to meet the most compassionate and dedicated individuals, which many of whom have testified tonight and testified for years before your board, such as Anissa, Sammy, Victor, Jerome, Melania, Darlene, Miss V, Natasha, and so many others who have been so integral to this movement for justice. All of them have taught us more about legal transformation in a few short months than all of law school thus far, and we are endlessly inspired by the circumstances so many of them have overcome and shared with us all, many of them having personally survived solitary or having loved ones that have survived or not survived this torture and inhumanity. And we really appreciate how they are able to use their circumstances to guide their unwavering advocacy, which just recently culminated in the passage of the HALT bill just last month. I'd like to pass it to Tina now.
Thank you, Pooja. Can you folks hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Just as the state has taken direction from these organizers and their expertise, so too should the city. It would be absurd and contrary to the law in New York State if New York City had policies that were worse for individuals who are incarcerated than conditions in jails and prisons across the state governed by HALT, which includes alternatives to solitary. As both you and the mayor promised over 9 months ago, the city must not only abide by HALT guidelines, but abolish the torture of solitary confinement altogether. In 2019, organizers created a detailed blueprint for ending the use of solitary confinement in New York City. For the past 3 years, the Board of Corrections has failed to take these recommendations, instead proposing a rule that renames and perpetuates some of the worst aspects of this torture. First and foremost, the Board of Corrections' proposed rules claim to end solitary while blatantly ignoring the basic human need for connection and communal engagement. Moving an individual from one cell to another for out-of-cell time does not constitute any meaningful or adequate engagement with other people. I would now like to pass it to my colleague Dodd to comment further.
Thank you, Tina. In addition to what my colleagues Tina and Pooja have just said, the proposed rule expands the building of restrictive units, which we respectfully condemn. There is absolutely no need to construct additional punitive isolated units. People should have out-of-cell time in large spaces that are conducive to human beings interacting in a meaningful and substantive way. We would also like to highlight that as law students and as aspiring attorneys, we find the inaccessibility of legal counsel to be particularly unacceptable as a component of your proposed rules. People should have access to their own counsel or legal advocate for hearings, and they must have the right to present evidence and cross-examine witnesses. Access to counsel is needed not only at the disciplinary hearing, but also throughout the placement review process. That placement process is another flaw in the proposed rules, as refusal to participate in programming should not keep people from moving from level 2 to level 3, or from level 3 to general population. These are just a few of the flaws in the rules that have been proposed by the BOC. We want to reiterate our ask that you follow the lead of all the incredible organizers at the HALT campaign and the Jails Action Coalition by adopting the blueprint that Tina has discussed, which they've set forth in order to fully and finally end this torture once and for all. We echo all of the comments put forth by the previous speakers from the HALT campaign and the Jails Action Coalition. Solitary confinement must end and the rules must be amended in order to accomplish that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you very
all.
much. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Nina Torres.
Bennett, did Nina speak earlier?
Yeah, I believe that Nina spoke earlier.
Okay.
Must have registered twice.
Peter Martinez.
Good evening, board members.
Good evening.
I just wanted to address a few things I spoke yesterday. Thank you again for allowing me the opportunity to speak. The visual pictures that were shown by Scott P. Doesn't show the actual inside of the cell. If you look at those pictures, you see a television, a phone, and those cells in NIC are in close proximity to the inmate right next to you. So there is a form of human inmate contact. I just wanted to clarify that. The second thing is that, we're taught at a very young age what is right and wrong. We're taught to correct our behaviors. So solitary confinement can be a means of, minimizing human interaction, but how do you protect inmates, staff, civilians from an individual who's highly assaultive? A lot of these individuals come off the street, they already have learned behaviors. They have programming available in the jails. They choose to either take the programming or not. But a lot of them are very invested in gangs, in drugs. So at the end of the day, we're getting these individuals in the later stages. So the issue is not solitary confinement or corrections, but programming in the streets, giving them programming, mental health. A lot of these guys we get off the streets have mental health issues, substance abuse issues, undiagnosed mental health issues. So abolishing solitary confinement would be part of the solution, yes. But at the end of the day, there are a very small population of inmates who are just, they just don't respect. And they have a track record of assaulting, cutting, slashing, beating men, women behind the bars. So at the end of the day, you guys have a very hard decision. Just keep in mind the amount of officers that have spoken over the past 2 days. It's a very, very serious issue. I know a lot of these proposed rules are going to be implemented within 3 days of the effective date. I also encourage you guys to check into the grade 1 assaults. Please, if you can just implement that, inmates that spit on staff, consider that a violent offense. And hope to hear from your decision soon. And I hope you guys are able to do the right thing.
Thank you. And our final speaker is Sarita Dafferty.
I'm gonna unmute Sarita briefly and see if it works.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Sarita.
Okay, wonderful. I'll start over. I didn't realize I couldn't be heard. Good evening, everyone, and thank you. I know it's been a long night of testimony and appreciate the board's time. I'm a member of the Jails Action Coalition and a co-director of Freedom Agenda. And I just want to make a couple of brief points. Tonight, people brought up several programs that work to address violence in the jails. They brought up the RSVP program in San Francisco. They brought up the CAPS program that exists in some areas of the New York City jails. There is not a disagreement about whether or not violence in the jails needs to be addressed. People agree on that. The question for the board is, what is it about this department that makes them incapable of implementing a program like RSVP, if you in fact think that they are not capable of implementing a program like RSVP? What is it about this department that makes them incapable of managing the jails with a staffing level that is 8 times the national average? I think in that sense, you really need to look at the failed leadership of the department. We have a consensus here tonight that the jails are not safe. So the question is, what's causing that? We can tell you that people who are incarcerated in the jails are in and out. Some people in a matter of days, some people whose cases may drag on for a couple of years. The Department of Corrections is the consistent presence creating a culture of violence and impunity. I want to name a couple of things that the board should do to address the safety of people incarcerated in the jails and the safety of people who work there. The board should amend this rule to truly and completely end solitary confinement because it does not work to eliminate violence. The board should also advocate to remove this commissioner because her failed leadership is ever more apparent. The board should advocate to take over the officer discipline process because the department isn't doing it, and it certainly does not send a message of accountability to people in custody when officers are able to abuse people with impunity. And you have 10 monitors reports that give you proof of that. This board should also advocate for a workforce transition to eliminate thousands of excess jobs in the Department of Corrections and help those people get training to move into other jobs. I mean, hearing people describe their work as correction officers certainly doesn't paint those as desirable jobs. And it doesn't have to be this way. It's by doing that that we could get the resources for the kinds of mental health treatment that the previous speaker noted. And while that doesn't fall in the board's power, it certainly falls within your realm to advocate for and to recognize that as a solution. I want to say briefly that we need to recognize that COBA is not advocating in good faith. You just had somebody tell you that it's terrible, that working on Rikers Island is horrific, and yet that is the same union that advocated to keep Rikers open. While we take into consideration different perspectives, I think it's just important for this board to recognize what many city council members have already recognized, which is that COBA is not advocating in good faith. So I want to just close after sort of pointing out things that the board should do to address violence in the jails and to make the jails safe, what you should not do, which is move forward with a half measure to address punitive isolation when you could do much better. Thank you all.
Thank you, Sarita.
Thank you, Sarita.
That concludes this evening's meeting. I just want to remind folks, because I know everybody didn't get a chance to finish their testimony, but I did set the clock at 4 minutes and 10 seconds to give people room to share what they want. But I want to remind folks that we really welcome written comments. You can email a written comment to boc@boc.nyc.gov or mail it to 1 Center Street, room 2213, New York, New York, 10007. We really want to hear from you. On behalf of the board, I want to extend a huge thank you to everyone who came out and shared both your personal experience, your professional experience, or your voice, because it matters to your community. We just want to thank y'all. It's an important process, part of this process, that we end up with something that reflects the values and the concerns and the opportunities expressed tonight and yesterday. So on behalf of the board, thank you and have a good night.
Thank you. Good night.